Welcome to Edwin Eisendrath's It's the Democracy, Stupid. A set of conversations about our government, our politics, and the kind of country we aspire to be. And now, here's your host, Edwin Eisendrath, on WCPT 820, Chicago's Progressive Talk.
Hello, everybody. Happy Saturday. It's beautiful here in Chicago. I live in, a neighborhood that's having a garden walk, and people have opened their homes. Yeah. You walk around, you talk to people, everywhere in the country, and this country just does not deserve the humiliating, embarrassing, chaotic, ridiculous government that we have under Donald Trump. I mean, this week, ICE agents posed as journalists in Connecticut, and DOJ officials launched an intimidation campaign against real journalists that included sending agents to the homes of New York Times reporters to issue subpoenas, right? They got everything upside down. Such is life in tin pot dictatorships and in the United States in the Trump era. It is humiliating and embarrassing on top of being dangerous. I mean, Trump's failures, his lies, grift, greed, narcissism, the list goes on. They have at last drained all the goodwill and respect that generations of Americans worked to build around the world. Our president is now openly mocked on the world stage. Our nation is humiliated. Trump says America is back. BS. America isn't back. It's on its back. And Donald Trump and his Republican Party are to blame. I mean, Jimmy Carter was a good man, a president who loved America, a leader who paid attention to detail, but that didn't prevent Iranian revolutionaries from overrunning the embassy back in the 1970s and taking 66 Americans hostage. Months of negotiations failed to bring those hostages home. Then, Iraq invaded Iran. That changed the calculus of the new Iranian government, and Iranians began to negotiate in earnest. Those negotiations succeeded. The hostages came home on the day Jimmy Carter left office. Throughout that terrible and deeply stressful time, the Strait of Hormuz was never closed. And still, Ronald Reagan and the Republicans used this crisis to paint Carter as weak and ineffective. Well, as Reagan would say, there you go again, because Donald Trump is utterly spent, desperately weak, and entirely ineffective. Trump launched a war without the approval of Congress, without explanation to the American people, and he thought it would make him strong. It didn't. It left him exposed. And now at least 18 Americans are dead, and zero of Trump's many and shifting war objectives have been achieved. And nevertheless, Trump announced a peace deal. And then he announced the deal was dead. And I guess this morning he says, they want to negotiate again. And then he says, the strait will be open again. Please. Jimmy Carter at least knew how to negotiate a deal. This guy, nope, too weak. Today, because of Trump's failures in, strategy, leadership, understanding, attention, ability to stay focused, perseverance, cultivation of allies, it's a long list, right? Iran controls the Strait of Hormuz. Iran's anti-American terrorist-sponsoring government, once on the verge of collapse, appears stronger than ever. It hasn't abandoned its nuclear ambitions. Its propagandists regularly mock Donald Trump. And, those Lego videos, they're fabulous. And increasingly, people everywhere are laughing at those videos. They're laughing at him. And partly in response, of course, Trump orders more bombings, thin-skinned as he is. And every day this fiasco continues, Iran shows the world that the United States is as ineffective as it is destructive. I mean, America's utter and ongoing humiliation at the hands of the Iranians has been noted by others. China is now testing long-range submarine-launched ballistic missiles. Russia continues to target civilians in Kiev with ballistic missiles. And Europe, not the United States, is leading the effort to help Ukraine fight back. In fact, at the recent NATO summit, Trump strode onto that stage as leader of the free world. And what did he do? He took aim at Spain, saying, I don't want anything to do with Spain. Cut off all trade to Spain, please, including visits. They're hopeless. Bad people. You know what the world did? It yawned. Trump can't cut off aid to Spain. His tough words mean nothing on the world stage. Again, utterly humiliating. A president whose words mean nothing. Trump questioned NATO, insulted our allies, even revived his demand to control Greenland. None of it matters. In fact, he ended up bowing to, our European allies' demands that he allow Ukraine to manufacture Patriot missiles. And remember, this is Donald Trump, right? The guy who boasted he would command the decisions of nations everywhere by using America's economy as a coercive tool. He would impose crushing tariffs to bring the world to heel. He didn't care about the inflationary impact on you and me. He didn't care about the Constitution, which gives the tariff power to Congress. He thought by imposing tariffs unilaterally, he would look strong. Well, as with unilaterally going to war, it had the opposite effect, right? And even his Supreme Court told him these tariffs were illegal. And in response, remember what he said? He said, wait for it. He said, I'm going to impose tariffs. Oh my God. He is a paper tiger, and our government is an embarrassment with no clout, no credibility, and no ability to lead. That doesn't mean it's not dangerous, but no ability to lead, no clout, nothing. I mean, even fellow autocrats know Trump can't be counted on. Mohammed bin Salman has now denied U.S. access to key military bases in Saudi Arabia. The Saudis are moving ahead with a massive pipeline to ship oil to market through the Red Sea, bypassing the Strait of Hormuz. Why are they doing this? It's so expensive. Why would they do it? They're doing it because they don't believe Donald Trump when he says the strait is open or that Americans will keep it open. No credibility. In fact, Trump's one unique achievement in the world, the one thing that he's done that no one else could ever do, is to have earned the distrust and disrespect of both Israel and its Arab adversaries. That's not easy to do, but he did it. And look, it's not just governments that mock him. After America lost the World Cup, the Belgian team posted a photo of them making fun of Donald Trump. The humiliation is everywhere. Even the MAGA crowd feels it. I mean, they personally invested billions in Trump's meme coin only to be proven suckers. Trump's ethno-religious administration has destroyed our government to deliver, we can't deliver benefits for anybody. Prices are going up. Access to quality healthcare is going on. Don't bother waiting for your mail. It's not coming. Access to justice. Here's one. Justice. That question doesn't even mean anything to this administration because justice is an idea. But indictments, investigations, imprisonments, they get that. Those are tools they can use to shut us up. Yet Americans aren't shutting up. We're standing up. And for this administration, it's just another humiliation. My God, in communities across the country, we just celebrated our 250th birthday, but our government subverted planned official celebrations to instead hold a series of Trump rallies. All failed. The MMA match on the White House lawn, embarrassing. The Great State Fair in the National Mall, empty. The biggest 4th of July fireworks in history, delayed until the early hours of July 5th by a Trump speech. Please. All right, my friends, it is election season. Time to remember that every bit of our global humiliation is brought to you with the full and complete complicity of the Republican Party. I have a fabulous show for you. It's starting in just a moment. Don't go away.
You're listening to Edwin Eisendrath's It's the Democracy, Stupid on WCPT 820.
Okay, everybody, I have a real treat. Dr. Peter Glick is back with us. He is, of course, a world-renowned scientist, a scholar, an author, the founder of the Pacific Institute, which is an innovative NGO focusing on the world's water challenges. Peter, when we talked way back in March, I think, of 2025, Los Angeles had just suffered terrible fires. And in that conversation, you taught me how much that disaster was related not just to fire, but to water. And then in that conversation, you also went on and taught me about the 3 ages of water, Milankovitch cycles, and how technology can help solve rather than just contribute to climate changes. That was pretty amazing. But what we didn't talk about a lot in that conversation was politics. And I think a lot of that more than science, it's the politics that have changed since then. And I think we're going to spend some time on that if you're comfortable with that.
Sure. So I am, of course, a scientist, and when I talk about science, that's one thing. When I talk about politics, of course, it's my personal interpretation and opinion of these things. But it's hard to separate water issues from either science or politics.
Right. But sometimes the politics pretends there's no science. The scientists don't often pretend there's no politics.
Well, one of the things I like to say is that without good science, you can't have good politics. But without politics, you're ultimately not going to be able to address water issues because they're so closely interconnected.
Yeah, they are. They are. So let's go back and focus back on Los Angeles, where we talked a year ago. Are conditions in Los Angeles and elsewhere even more troubling now, or have we been able to learn and do something about it?
Well, of course, every time we have a challenge, I'd like to think that we learn something new. In the fires of Los Angeles, we learned how vulnerable our communities are, even our urban communities, to extreme events, not just hydrological events, but the way the climate is changing, the way that climate influences fire frequency and intensity. Sometimes we think wildfires are something that happened out in the wild, but one of the things that the Los Angeles fires taught us is that these are urban events as well, and we also know, of course, that all of these are connected to water. And in the Western U.S., water is especially a challenge, as I'm sure we'll talk about more later. It's always been a challenge. But we have water problems everywhere. And one of the things I think we're learning every day is that it doesn't really matter where you are. You're ultimately vulnerable to changes in climate and changes in water.
Yeah.
And water is so important to everything we care about that we have to learn how to deal with those in a new way.
Well, let's talk about, again, so let's stick with California for a minute. I have a brother who
Sure.
lives in Los Angeles. He's happy to tell me the reservoirs are now full of water once again, and that people there tell me that, that the crisis is past. But it's also true, I think, that the biggest reservoir in all of California is a snowpack that's no longer there. So is there a way for California to transition from snow to rain and be okay?
Well, so first of all, the hydrologic cycle, evaporation, formation of clouds, rainfall, runoff back to the rivers and to the oceans, and then evaporation again. The hydrologic cycle is naturally very variable. We have wet years and we have dry years, and in California and in the West in general, and frankly everywhere, we have wet periods and we have dry periods. And one of the things that we've learned is that during the wet periods, when we have a good year of rain or a good year of snow, people tend to forget about droughts and their behavior goes back to not caring about how much water they use. And then ultimately a dry year, a period of dry years always comes back. And we have to sometimes relearn the things that we had forgotten. We've forgotten that we get dry years and we have to be careful about the water we use. And that's certainly true in California. It's true everywhere. We have big reservoirs. We build big reservoirs everywhere to store water when we get it in the wet period, so we can use it in the dry periods. And we use them to generate hydropower, and we use them for recreation. At the moment, in California, we've had a couple of reasonably good winters. That's when we get our rain. And the reservoirs are relatively full. But as you point out, one of the big natural reservoirs in the West and in California is snowpack. We get snow in the winter. It slowly melts in the spring and the summer, and that helps feed our rivers. It helps replenish our reservoirs. And one of the things we're having now increasingly is what we call a snow drought. And this is tied to climate change. We're getting less snow in the winter and more rain. Even if the total amount of precipitation is the same, more of it is rain and less of it is snow because the earth is warming up and we're losing the snowpack, as you mentioned. And that's a big problem. It's going to change the way we manage water. It's going to change the way we manage our reservoirs. And the truth is we're not totally prepared for that either.
What would preparation be? Do you have to build new reservoirs that contain the same, not the same, but same in order of magnitude amount of water as would be in a snowpack?
Yeah, so that's the traditional thinking that you lose one reservoir, you have to build another one. Part of the problem is in California, and again in many parts of the world, we've built on all the good dam sites. We've built massive reservoirs, tens of thousands of them, and there are no more places in the West to build a big reservoir that is environmentally acceptable, economically acceptable, politically acceptable. Needless to say, there's no way to build enough new storage to compensate for the loss of the massive amount of snow storage that we get. And so we have to do something different. We have to either change the way we operate our current reservoirs to store a little more water in the winter. And, we could talk about that a little bit. We're thinking about figuring out ways to store more water in groundwater. We overpump our groundwater. We take too much out. But there is a potential for storing more of this winter runoff that we're getting, that's rain rather than snow, in groundwater. That's another possibility. Another possibility is, the truth is, we have to learn to use our water differently and maybe use less of it.
Okay, so thank you for calling me on old thinking. I can now think like a younger man. I appreciate that. The three ideas that you laid out here: improving the way we manage current reservoirs, using groundwater, and being more thoughtful about the water we do use, are really interesting. No matter what you do with current reservoirs, you cannot have them you cannot have them collect enough water to equal what you lose in the snowpack. So what increment do you think you can get from better management of the reservoir?
So this is actually a very interesting idea. It's sort of subtle, but let me describe it. In California, we have these big reservoirs, and in the winter, we keep them relatively empty because we use them for flood protection. We're waiting for the winter storms to come in. We're waiting for the snow that's in the mountains to melt and then fill those reservoirs. And we want those reservoirs to be as full as possible at the very end of the melt season, so that we can use it in the dry season. It doesn't rain in California between April and September, almost at all. And that's the big period of water demand. So we want the reservoirs full at the end of the winter so that we can use it for agriculture and for the dry seasons. So part of the challenge here is balancing this need for flood protection to keep the reservoirs empty and the need to have them as full as possible when the risk for flooding is changed. That's the way we run the reservoirs are something called rule curves. They're based on historical records of when we expect to get big storms and when we expect the snow to melt and to fill up those reservoirs. And as the climate changes, we have to change the rules. We have to keep those reservoirs somewhat empty for flood protection, but we have to fill them faster, which means storing more of that winter runoff earlier. And some of the reservoirs in California are starting to do that, and we're getting more storage, whereas typically if we operated them the way we used to, we wouldn't be able to fill them necessarily at the right time. So it's a change in the way we think about and operate those reservoirs.
That's so interesting. And I had a conversation with someone a couple of weeks ago about the electricity grid. And sure enough, it's built for peak demand, and we keep it, we build a lot of capacity we never use. It's almost the same idea. There, the notion is to use batteries to store more power so that we don't have to build more grid to reach peak demand, but can better use what we already have to have a whole lot more capacity. And it's a similar concept you're talking about with reservoirs.
That's actually a really excellent point, and I should have raised it earlier, but there's a very interesting water parallel here. We also use hydropower to generate electricity in California. And because you can turn on and off the dams very, very quickly, we've traditionally used hydropower as a peaking power. That is, during the day when the absolute maximum electricity demand occurs. People come home from work, they turn on their appliances, they start cooking, the air conditioning is at its peak in the late afternoon. We often turn on the hydropower to satisfy that big jump in demand.
Yep.
That's right. And because first of all, it's easier to do that with hydropower, and it's cheaper to do that than with natural gas. But we're now entering an era when we have solar and we have batteries, and it's increasingly possible to use batteries for those peaking demand rather than hydropower. And interestingly enough, that will save water. We can keep the water in the reservoir longer, and we can use it for other things rather than letting it run through the turbines and down the rivers.
So interesting. Let's get to the groundwater idea. Also, when we last spoke, it was after, but near enough to its publication that I remembered it, that the New York Times had run a really interesting series on groundwater depletion all over the United States with maps. And you were familiar with that. We talked about that. The idea that you could have groundwater and that people wouldn't take it is an amazing thought. We haven't been so lucky in our history. But you think you could somehow take this, when you have the reservoirs full, you could somehow transition that water back to groundwater? How does that work?
Yeah, so here's the background for your listeners who might not be familiar with this. Groundwater, water wells, water in the soils, it's long been a very important source of water for many areas of the country. For the Great Plains, a lot of the irrigation there comes from groundwater. In the Central Valley of California, a lot of that water is pumped up to use for irrigation again. And think of it as a bathtub. It's recharged. Groundwater is replenished when it rains, and the rain flows into the soils, and it's stored in the ground. And the drain at the bottom is what we pump out. When we pump out more than nature recharges, groundwater levels fall. And throughout the western United States, and again, many parts of the world, we're pumping groundwater faster than nature recharges it. And like a bathtub, it's draining. And it's becoming more expensive to pump because it's deeper and deeper. It's drying up completely. Some farms have to go out of production because there's no longer accessible groundwater. That's been a real problem, and it continues to be a major problem worldwide, groundwater overdraft. In California,
let me interrupt you there for 1 second before you finish that thought. Is it also true that if you deplete the groundwater just because of gravity, the ground sinks, if you will, and then even if it rains, there's no more room to replenish it in the way it used to be?
Yes, that is sometimes a problem depending on the geology. And there are absolutely, again, the Central Valley of California is a great example of this. There are parts of the Central Valley of California where the ground has literally subsided many, many feet. It's dropped, tens of or dozens of feet over the years because we pulled the groundwater out, and the ground has subsided and compacted. That's absolutely true. That's not true everywhere. It depends on the geology. Okay. But the idea here is that we're getting this extra runoff in the winter when we'd love to be able to store it, but our reservoirs may not be capable of storing it, and we're starting to explore the ability to spread that water over land and have it seep into the ground and recharge the groundwater. And then that groundwater can later be used for irrigation. It can be used for other purposes. It can restore stream flows and natural ecosystems. It depends on the geology. It depends on farmers' willingness to spread floodwaters over their land in the winter to help recharge groundwater. And as you hinted, it depends on our ability politically to make sure that to understand who controls that water resources. Whose water really is that? Does it belong to the farmer whose land it was spread on? Does it belong to the irrigation district? That's an institutional challenge that we're still working through.
And just physically, how do you move all that water?
Well, traditionally, we move water in pipelines, we move it in aqueducts and canals. If you store it in groundwater, you pump it out with pumps, and then either it's used locally or it's put into canals and moved. Again, in California, we've invested in a tremendous distribution system for water. We get the water in the mountains, we need it along the coast, we get it in the north, we need it in Los Angeles in the south. So we built a big infrastructure to move water from one place to another.
But Peter, that infrastructure that's already built is not the infrastructure that's going to spread it over farmland in the winter.
Well, so it depends. That's a good point. If we're storing groundwater in a particular water district, it's much more likely to be used locally. If there is no infrastructure, and sometimes there is infrastructure to pump out groundwater and move it in canals from one district to another or one region to another, but sometimes it'll be used locally by farmers, and that would be fine if instead of using water from somewhere else, they're using locally stored groundwater.
Sure. No, I'm missing a step.
But that's an important institutional question.
That actually wasn't the one I was asking. I can't figure out how to phrase it that makes sense because I'm sure the answer is so obvious that I can't explain. How does it get in the ground? Are you talking about just letting the rainwater sit, just natural flooding of the ground, or are you moving water from a reservoir out to fill the...
No. So the way it works is the excess water from the mountains flows down. The snow melts and it flows down in rivers.
Yes.
And streams. What we typically will try and do is we'll let that water flood over agricultural land. We'll either it'll naturally flood because the rivers are high in the winter, or we arrange with flood systems or reservoirs to let it spread over the land. And when we spread it over large areas, farmland, it will seep into the ground. And it'll seep into the groundwater. Sometimes we'll actively try and pump it into the ground, but that's a very difficult thing to do.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. So in today's practice, is it today's practice to try and limit natural flooding by directing all that water into the reservoirs?
Yes. So reservoirs are traditionally built to prevent serious flooding, flood that's built for flood protection. In the old days when there were no reservoirs and you got a really big storm and really a lot of snow melt, we would get massive floods in the Central Valley. I mean, they're historical floods. And so we built a lot of reservoirs to store that water in the winter and release it slowly to protect from flooding. And that's still the case. And now what we're really talking about is sort of smaller intentional flooding to help restore groundwater.
Okay. So now, belatedly, I've caught up. Now, on the third notion that you talked about, which is just human beings being a whole lot more sensible about their water use. What does that mean?
Well, basically, the idea here is, and again, this is true everywhere, more and more we humans use more water than we should to do the things that we want to do. Most of the water we use worldwide goes to agriculture. 80% of the human used water goes to grow the food that we eat. And the other 20% is industrial water use, commercial water use, the water use in our homes. And human use of water is drying up our rivers, and it's overpumping our groundwater, and it's destroying natural ecosystems. And so that balance, figuring out how to deal with that is the water sustainability question that you and I have previously talked about and that I've written about. And so one of the important questions is, can we humans do the things we want to do with less water? Can we grow more food with less water? Can we make semiconductors and flush our toilets and wash our clothes more efficiently? And that's a technological question. Can we have better irrigation systems? Can we have smarter and better appliances? Can we make steel and aluminum with more efficient water technologies? And the answer is yes. We can do a lot of what we do with a lot less water. And that reduces the demand on groundwater, it reduces the demand on ecosystems, it reduces inefficiencies, it saves us money, it saves us energy. It's a good idea all around, and that's sort of the efficiency side of thinking about water sustainability.
You're tempting me to go back to a political question. Forgive me, but this, what you're saying now, in what you told me last time, was that our environmental challenges were, at least from a science perspective, clear, and that the solutions to those challenges were, if not clear, at least visible. And the obstacles were more, do we have the will to do it? That's still true. It's probably even more true because the science just gets better.
I believe that's true. I am an optimist. Some people think an optimist is just a poorly informed pessimist. But when I wrote that book, The Three Ages of Water, the third age was my vision for a sustainable future, based on what I see around us, the success stories at doing the things that need to be done. We're just not doing enough of them, and we're not doing them fast enough. And unfortunately, in the United States and many places, we're actually walking in the wrong direction now. But I do believe those solutions are available.
Yeah, I mean, we're paying wind farms to shut down, but I guess we're also closing the Strait of Hormuz, which might remind people that there's an incentive not to use fossil fuels for everything. So.
But here's another good example. The United States, many years ago, put in place efficiency standards, energy efficiency standards, and water efficiency standards for new appliances. And this happened partly because the states started to do this. California put in place water efficiency standards for toilets and washing machines and dishwashers,
aerators, and
energy efficiency standards for refrigerators. And California did this, and Massachusetts did it, and more states started to do this. And so finally, all the manufacturers said, wait a minute, we don't want to meet 50 different state standards for making our appliances. Let's have a national. They agreed, let's do a national standard. And we put in place energy efficiency and water efficiency standards for appliances. And the manufacturers like that. And those standards have saved just an unbelievably large amount of energy and water over what we would have used to do the same things, to cool our food in refrigerators and to flush our toilets and to wash our clothes if we hadn't done those. The Trump administration is rolling back those standards. They're saying, I can't even understand the rationale, so I'm not going to try and come up with one. But they're saying, we shouldn't have energy efficiency standards and water efficiency standards. It's ridiculous.
I can tell you the rationale. The rationale is political money. It has nothing to do with the environment. Yeah.
Well, but, ironically, the manufacturers don't want these because the states can still set their own standards. And the manufacturers don't want to make one set of appliances for California and one set for Illinois and one set for Arizona. I mean, it's ideological, but it's illogical.
I agree with that, too. But please know they're coming after state standards as well.
Yeah.
This crowd is devoted to doing what it wants to do. Yeah. Oh, all right. Well, look, I want to ask you about something else related because you wrote about it and it was interesting to me because I was a Chicago alderman in my youth. I paid a lot of attention to our infrastructure, and you wrote about the mismatch between, well, I guess climate-caused disruptions to water and sanitation systems, and that we might see some threats to the ones we have. What are you seeing that makes us worry that the built environment we currently have for water and sewers are not up to the moment?
Oh, there are lots of examples. One of the long predicted consequences of human-caused climate change is that we would see increased intensity of floods and droughts, that the extremes would get more extreme.
Right.
So in our cities, of course, we build for storm water, and we build based on historical understanding of what storms we get, and the storms are getting more extreme. We're getting wetter and more intense storms, and in some places they're beginning to overwhelm the built infrastructure that we built for stormwater capture. Another great current example is on the Colorado River. We built a lot of infrastructure. Again, we're going back to big dams. We built Lake Mead and Lake Powell. We built the Glen Canyon Dam and Boulder Dam.
Yeah.
With the understanding of the amount of water we thought we would be getting on the river. Climate change has already affected significantly the amount of water we get on the Colorado River by reducing it substantially. Something long predicted. I did a study in the 90s about how climate change would affect the Colorado River, and those estimates are already coming true, and the reservoirs are going dry. We have this massive infrastructure, these big dams and the big reservoirs, and they're nowhere near full, and they haven't been full for decades now. We're not able to meet the demands for water on the Colorado, and it's because of climate change, and the infrastructure is no longer adequate.
Last week in Chicago, we'd had some very big rains. For most of the last 50 years, we've been blowing up dynamite underground to create a 100-mile long tunnel system for water, and it holds, I think, something amazing like 13 billion gallons. And last week, for the first time, it was 96% full, and like no room. So we have both examples: not enough water and too much water in different places.
But that is also a positive story in the sense that that is the kind of infrastructure, the new kinds of infrastructure that we will need. We will need new ways of dealing with stormwater. We will need new ways of dealing with drought and shortages. And some places are starting to build the new infrastructure that will need to deal with climate change. This is a cost of climate change. The deniers of climate change say, "Oh, it's going to cost so much money to reduce greenhouse gas emissions," which, by the way, happens to also be false. But they tend to ignore what we have to spend to deal with the consequences of climate change that we're now no longer able to avoid, like extreme floods and droughts, like rising sea level. Those are costs that society is going to have to bear because we failed to do what we should have done decades ago to reduce greenhouse gas emissions.
Yeah. Forgive me. Like, you go to water, I go to politics. Right now, Congress is getting a bill to reauthorize money we spend for defense. And it includes a pile of cash to protect some of the biggest Navy yards, to rebuild them for sea level rise they fully expect, when the rest of the government is told there's $0 to talk about things like climate change and sea level rise. It doesn't exist. But by the way, here's $1 billion to raise your port.
Yeah, it's pretty ironic. So I have a new book coming out called "When the Well Is Dry." I was going to get to that. Yeah, and it talks about conflicts over water and the role of the military in dealing with water challenges and violence over water and so on. And one of the points it makes, which you've just raised, is the military and the defense intelligence community have long paid a lot of attention to climate change and to water risks. That's their job. Their job is to understand threats. And honestly, I think they've done a very good job over the years, up until the Trump administration, when all of a sudden their annual assessments of security issues no longer talk about those environmental threats. And yet, as you point out, the Navy is spending billions and billions of dollars to raise the level of the docks in Norfolk at the Naval Air Station and Hampton Roads, the biggest naval station in the United States, because they're vulnerable to sea level rise, and they know it. So the Trump administration refuses to talk about climate change. They refuse to acknowledge that there are environmental threats to the military, or that the military is going to have to react to environmental challenges in the future. But the military deep down understands this. When the Trump administration is gone, presumably more rational voices will once again make those points.
Yeah. If not, it'll be the irrational voices of the very angry people who are either too wet or too thirsty, who are going to make them make those decisions. I lived is wrong. I worked for many years in Saudi Arabia, where they have, um, I think, a 40-day supply of water if somebody blew up their desalinization plants. At least that's what they told me the years ago when I was there. And of course, we have Iran and talks about blowing up desalinization plants.
Yeah,
Water and war, water and violent fights about water are nothing new, but we're seeing more of that, aren't we?
yeah. So that's exactly what this new book addresses. It's the way water and water systems have been weapons during conflicts or casualties, targets during conflicts, or where water has triggered violence, where people fight over access and control of water resources. We've seen recently, as you point out, the vulnerability of certain large centralized water infrastructure to conflicts. Now, the Iran war is not a water war, but water infrastructure has been implicated. There were some modest attacks on desalination plants in the Persian Gulf area. As you point out, those countries, Saudi Arabia, Oman, Qatar, Kuwait, they're all extraordinarily sensitive to and vulnerable to attacks on their desalination, which provides almost all of their high-quality drinking water now. And so that's an increasing worry. And we're seeing a greater and greater trend. We maintain something called, at the Pacific Institute, called the Water Conflict Chronology, which people can Google, just Water Conflict Chronology. It's basically a database going back thousands of years of attacks on water systems. Water is a trigger, water is a weapon, water is a casualty of conflict. There are thousands and thousands of examples.
Okay, I now know what I'm spending my afternoon doing. That's fascinating.
Yeah, there are actually some amazing stories.
Well, what's your favorite story about a water fight?
Yeah, I'll give you one. Again, it's a story I write about in the new book. So in the 1500s, like around 1500, 1501, 1502, Machiavelli and Leonardo
Oh my
da
God,
Vinci,
Machiavelli and Leonardo together
conspired during a war between the Republic of Florence, where they were from, and the downstream Republic of Pisa on the Arno River. They conspired to divert the Arno River away from Pisa by digging a canal to move the water away from Pisa. Pisa was their arch enemy at the time. And they actually Florence started to dig this canal, and it failed for a variety of reasons. I won't go into the details, but it's a wonderful story of a collaboration between Machiavelli and Leonardo da Vinci to use water as a weapon.
Weirdly, I know that story. And I don't know why I know that. I know that story because someone once wrote a book about what Machiavelli learned about politics from Leonardo that night. But yes, that
Anyway,
is
there are lots of
fabulous.
great stories. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. All right. So I want to ask you about this. May not be completely in your wheelhouse, but I talk to people in Iowa, which is, very near where I am. And it's one of the most polluted states in the country. And people don't understand that because it's not big industry. It's all agricultural pollution. And people say, yeah, that the algae blooms in the Gulf of Mexico are due to agricultural runoff in Iowa. And I'm wondering you talk about the flows of water and what we can do about water, but is the pollution question of water something that that factors into how we store, treat, move water?
Sure. So, interestingly enough, the environmental movement in the United States in the 60s was originally really largely a water pollution problem. The Cuyahoga River caught fire in Cleveland, and it was on the front page of the newspapers. And there was the same year a massive oil spill off the Santa Barbara coast. And those two events really helped mobilize and stimulate what turned out to be a nascent environmental movement in the U.S. And it led to the Clean Water Act and the Safe Drinking Water Act and some of the other important federal legislation that we have. And water pollution continues to be a very serious problem. What you've talked about is agricultural runoff from not just Iowa, of course, but all of the states that share the Mississippi River, pesticides and fertilizers that flow down the river into the Gulf of Mexico. And cause algal blooms and serious environmental problems there. But we have all sorts of new. I should say the environmental movement of the 60s and later really helped address some very serious industrial water problems. And we saved Lake Erie and we brought a lot of those environmental problems under control. But there are new pollutants that are produced and in our water supply and are not adequately regulated. And, this is another example where the Trump administration is failing the American people by rolling back environmental regulations on water pollution and preventing new standards from being put in place for some of these new pollutants. And it harms human health and it harms ecosystem health and it's not under control.
And people are worried about that, the PFAS in the water and things like that. They're also worried about data centers' use of water.
Yeah. So, that's a new story. The data centers thing has sort of exploded onto the scene in the last couple of years with the expansion of AI and the investment of some of the big mega Silicon Valley firms. Sure. And data centers are incredibly energy intensive and they're very water intensive. How water intensive they are, though, partly depends on how they use the water and what kind of cooling systems they use and whether they're willing to be good citizens in their communities, which they've typically not been, but they could be. So the water problem for data centers is a big issue in some places, and it could be solved if the big companies were willing to solve them. And I think that's a place where politics is, again, important. Our communities have to get together, and we have to insist that they use the best technology and that they reduce their water use and they reduce their energy use and they not be built in places where they shouldn't be built. That's a local community issue.
Citizens, forgive me, even if they were good citizens, at the moment, I think they are sparking a renewed environmental movement, which I welcome, even if the facts are a little confused sometimes.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. Obviously, from a science point of view, it's important to get the facts right, to understand from a water perspective, how much water are they really using? Is it a one-time use or is it a recirculating use? Could they change their energy system to use less water because they have a different cooling? I mean, there are lots of technological choices here. But the companies have to step up and they have to do the right thing, and communities have a role to play in making the companies do the right thing.
I want to ask you about one other topic, really something we haven't covered, but it has been in the news and it is something that you understand and I don't, which is a very big El Nino. What does that mean? What is that? Like I see it in the news. It's supposed to impact all our weather, but really it's mostly about water, I think.
So it's about weather overall and climate, of course. El Nino is the name given to a cyclical climate system that develops in the Pacific Ocean, where you get extra warm water coming to the surface and traveling to the east from the Pacific, across the Pacific towards Central America and South America and the west coast of the United States. The opposite, La Nina, is cool water, and these are cyclical. They happen every few years. There's an ebb and a flow of these water systems. But the interesting thing is they're so dramatic and so significant that they affect weather worldwide. And when we have a strong El Nino, when we have a lot of this warm water rising in the Pacific, you can get very high levels of rainfall in Southern California. You can get serious droughts in parts of Africa. I mean, really, it affects global weather systems. And it looks like an extraordinarily strong El Nino is developing this year. And we're going to have to deal with the consequences of that.
Yeah.
I will point out one of the reasons it's strong is because humans are changing the climate and we're raising the temperature of the planet in general, and we're raising ocean temperatures, and so this is a weather problem, but it's also a long-term climate issue.
The focus of what of the impact of this is, as you say, changes in weather patterns. We're going to have we have drought and more water in different places in a bigger magnitude than we're used to. In the oceans themselves, if the warmer water is rising, I assume the colder water is falling. Do we know anything about what happens to life lower in the ocean when the colder water comes down?
Oh, well, for this, you're going to have to invite an oceanographer and somebody who knows much more about ocean dynamics and biology in the ocean to talk about. But absolutely, certainly there will be effects. We see changes in fish populations, where the fish are, and fish health. During El Nino, sometimes we see crashes in certain fish populations because food supplies change. You could have a whole session on El Nino. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, those of us who live in the Great Lakes, there's a phenomenon where the lakes turn over in the winter, where the warm water goes down, the cold water comes up. And that's been very natural and healthy for our lakes for a long time. But I can't imagine it at the scale of like a enormous chunk of the Pacific Ocean.
Yeah.
Let's spend a little more time on your new book. When does it come out? And I mean, it isn't already out, is it? Did I miss that?
Nope, it comes out in November. It's called When the Well is Dry, How Water Fuels Violence and Shapes Peace. And it's about the long history of conflicts over water resources and what we ought to do about it and how to move from conflict to cooperation over our water resources.
Briefly, how do we move from conflict to cooperation? I mean, is this international treaties? I mean, I know, again, we have a Great Lakes Compact that is us and Canada that talks about who can take water out of the Great Lakes and those kinds of things. Is that what we're talking about?
That's a great example. So part of the problem is first to understand how water and conflict are related. And I've talked briefly about that already. Sometimes water triggers conflict when there's disputes over control or access. People don't have the water they want. And the solutions there are, in part, provide water, basic water and sanitation for everyone on the planet, something we failed to do, to reduce the risk that people are going to fight over access to water. So there are a whole series of things you can do to reduce the possibility that water will trigger conflicts. Another problem, though, is when water is a casualty of conflict. And again, we've talked briefly about that as with attacks on desalination plants, but there are a lot of examples throughout history where dams have been attacked, where civilian water infrastructures have been attacked. And that's a violation of international law. The laws of war, the Geneva Conventions say you cannot attack civilian water infrastructure quite explicitly. And so better enforcement of international law or stronger international law would be one of the approaches there. Another challenge is, and you raised this just now, a lot of water is shared internationally. Rivers cross borders. We share the Colorado with Mexico. The Nile is shared by 10 or 11 countries in Africa. We share the Great Lakes with Canada. So another important tool is shared international agreements, treaties between countries that share water resources. And most of the big rivers worldwide that are shared by 2 or more countries don't have any treaties. There is no comprehensive treaty on the Nile. There's no comprehensive treaty on the Mekong. We have a treaty with Mexico on the Colorado and the Rio Grande, which is under tension right now, but we do have a treaty there. There is, as you say, this agreement between the U.S. and Canada on the Great Lakes, and that's a great agreement. But there are plenty of places where there are disputes over water resources and either inadequate treaties or no treaties, and we need that's another possible tool to reduce conflicts.
Yeah, I mean, there was a story in the news this week of a reservoir in Israel that feeds water systems in Jordan, where naturally right now they're in dispute about how much water should be let out of that. very
Yeah,
tinderbox.
so Israel and Jordan have a peace treaty in 1994, and there's a water component to that, where Israel agrees to provide some water to Jordan in some places, and Jordan provides some water to Israel in other regions where they have water. That's been a great agreement, but and there was a little addendum to that agreement a few years ago to provide a little more water to Jordan from Israel. And Israel is now backing off on that for political reasons.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I can't wait to read this new book. I know that the Three Ages of Water was a remarkably interesting and optimistic book about what we can do. In this one, just the title tells me that while you're still an optimist, you are trying to address something terrifying.
Well, it's hard to deny that we have serious water problems, that we have failed to provide safe water and sanitation to everyone on the planet. Their ecosystems are crashing because of overuse of water. We've talked about over pumping of groundwater and the risks to agriculture there. The climate's changing. We know that there are water problems. And as in the first book in The Three Ages of Water, I talk about solutions to move toward more sustainable water. Yep. And similarly, we know that there's conflict over water. It goes back thousands of years. It's continuing and worsening today. But again, I do know that there are solutions to reduce the risks of conflicts over water. We can move from conflict to cooperation. We can move from war to peace over water resources. Again, the book has lots of positive examples because I am maybe a naive optimist, but I like to believe that we can solve our water problems and that we will work to do so.
That, and we are out of time, so I think that is a great place to end. All right, everybody, Peter Glick is fabulous. The book is When the Well Runs Dry? I don't have it quite
When
right.
The Well is Dry. When the Well is dry. Yeah.
When the well
you can order it now. It's available. It's available for pre-order, of course, but
okay,
it won't be out till November.
And if you're interested in this stuff, go to the Pacific Institute and look for the chronology of water conflicts.
Yeah,
I will be doing this afternoon. Thank you so much for your time.
It's my pleasure. It's always a delight to talk to you. You're listening to Edwin Eisendrath's It's the Democracy, Stupid on WCPT 820.
Okay, everybody. Representative Sean Casten is back with us. He brings the voices of the good people of Illinois' 6th Congressional District, plus a whole lot of uncommon good sense to Washington, D.C. How are you? Welcome back.
Good. I must say I'm delighted to log in a little bit early and hear Peter Glick talking to you. That Three Ages of Water book is just a fantastic book, and it's always nice to log in and be like, I think I've read this guy's stuff.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's who you're talking to. So good stuff. Plug for his. I'm not familiar with his new book, but definitely give a plug for his former book.
Well, thank you for that. It's fascinating, isn't it? I mean, it'll be off topic for us to go there, but it really is fun for me once in a while to talk mostly about the science of climate change and what we can do rather than the politics of it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Stick with the controversial part.
Right.
those laws of physics can be changed, I'm told. You just have to vote in the House.
In the House, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, look, when last you and I spoke, you had made progress on your Energy Bill Relief Act. And that was just a couple of months ago, but with the GOP in charge, that was like 11 House vacations ago. I mean, like what's going on with the real work of, I know we'll talk about your trip to Europe where the real work of Congress, I guess, has to go to happen. But like, what's going on there?
How to even put this succinctly? My general view of this term is that if we lived in a government with sort of a more parliamentary system, it would be much easier to understand what's going on in Washington. I think when we view this as there's two parties and why does one party work and why does the other party work or not work or whatever else, I think you lose some of the nuance that you'd have, if we had 15 parties and you'd say, oh, this faction is, at odds with this faction. And within the Republican Party now, you really have two parties that don't like each other. You have the old guard, the Liz Cheney wing of the party, if you will, culturally conservative, but pro-governance, in favor of the United States being the leader of the free world. Think George H.W. Bush, like that sort of, and that party is still there. It's a lot of the Republicans, I would say, are in that quote unquote party, but it's minority of the Republican caucus. You then have sort of the descendants of the Tea Party wave and the Freedom Caucus and QAnon and various crazier stripes in between, who are still very culturally conservative, but but are essentially anti-governance. This is the Jim Jordan, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Chip Roy, now Anna Paulina Lewis party, and those two groups really don't like each other. Kevin McCarthy lost his job because the wingnut faction didn't like that we had passed an overwhelmingly bipartisan bill with sort of the neocons. And so we're now left with all of these things that we should absolutely be doing. We need to come up with a way to reauthorize FISA. That's always a controversial topic, but we need to make sure our intelligence agencies can work. We need to go through and do appropriations. My word, we should be doing oversight. And there's not an agreement within the Republican Party about whether we should do those things. And so, we ended up with this housing bill that was a overwhelmingly bipartisan bill. If I'm thinking purely as a political actor, well, that's a little bit of a bummer because it gives a good bill for the Republicans to campaign on, right?
The president threw that away.
The president threw it away, and then and threw it away in part with Anna Paulina Luna saying, if you bring this bill to the floor without taking away people's rights to vote with the SAVE Act, I'm going to shut down the next rule vote. And so we've now had for 2 weeks, you only need a few Republicans to shut down the floor because of the way that our rule votes work. And so for 2 straight weeks, they've done that. They're at least signaling right now they're going to do it again when we get back there next week. And I don't know whether to be happy or sad about that. I'm sad because I want us to do the job that the people elected us to do. But I'm happy because when I look at what's on the agenda, I'd rather us not pass those bills than pass them. So that's okay.
They're dangerous. Excuse me. And I don't know how you do. Wow. That's really bad on radio.
Let me know if you need me to pinch hit for you.
I don't know how you do things FISA is about making sure that our intelligence agencies can do their job. But right now we have an administration that's allergic to oversight and is eager to weaponize intelligence. It's very hard to give them tools that they will abuse.
Well, no, look, there's some really legitimate issues that are there. And, I voted against the last 2 FISA resolutions for exactly that reason. But I also think it's legitimately hard. And, you know this, but just, so we don't use acronyms that, lose your listeners on this. We have, if you are not an American, by definition, you aren't protected under the First Amendment, Second Amendment, you don't have constitutional protections. That means that we can tap and surveil people who are trying to attack the United States, and whether through phone calls or emails or text messages, et cetera, et cetera. What do you do when a bad actor who we're tracking is in communication with an American citizen? And if that American citizen, maybe they're a partner to that crime, that American citizen has Fourth Amendment rights. You need warrants and wiretaps. And so we can't prosecute, which is appropriate under the Fourth Amendment. We can't prosecute that person. But then if you have that database, under what circumstances could you query that database, make searches, which is it's not I'm searching for Edwin, but I believe there is a plot to attack WCPT. I want to find out if anybody has named the reporters on WCPT in the course of this attack. Well, is that a legal search? Is that an unauthorized? So there's nuances and complexities there that with good people, you trust that that'll be carried out the right way.
Yep. Yeah.
With bad people like Bill Pulte, who has already tried to weaponize the intelligence systems, there's some nervousness there. Hopefully we're through that now and can find a way to get this done. But we can't even vote on it because we're arguing about whether or not we can take away Americans' rights to vote.
We are arguing about that. All right, let's leave that aside for a second and just let's talk about your Europe trip, which is I mean, partly because it's related to the conversation that everybody who was listening just heard me have about the environment. So you talk a little bit about what you went there to do and
Yeah, so we had a handful of us who we're going to go to the climate conference in Brazil, and because some vote schedules changed around, we weren't able to go. But we had locked down, and we had the budget for the trip to go and do it, and we wanted to make sure that notwithstanding what's coming out of the White House, we still maintain these channels of communication. There is one country in the world that is no longer a part of the Paris Climate Accord. That is the United States. It's not Yemen, it's not Afghanistan, it's not Iran. Those countries are all part of the Paris Climate Accord. The United States is not. We want to make sure that we continue to have dialogue with the folks who are leading that effort. Whether or not we ever find our way back into there in some kind of a durable fashion, every American company that does business anywhere but the United States, or in addition to the United States, is affected by those rules. So let's be there. So we set up the trip to go over there to figure out those lines of communication, and frankly to remind our allies in Europe that you can love America without loving its leader, or vice versa, and to remind them that America is still a good place with a lot of good people, even if we've got some problems in the White House right now. And so in the course of being there, we got there, we were meeting with the European Parliament just as they were voting on a trade package that, among other things, forced them to agree to buy over 700 million, way more natural gas in the United States than Europe will ever demand. But it was just, they had to sort of pay lip service to say they would. It was non-binding, but they have to say they do that because that was something that the Trump administration had foisted on them. I'll give you just two really depressing things that were told to us. One of them said, at one point we were told, what your country has done in Iran has a silver lining to it because it's hugely accelerating the deployment of electric vehicles in Europe from people who don't want to be exposed to rising gasoline costs, thanks to your president.
And those electric vehicles are coming from China.
Yeah, but I guess Donald Trump, global warming champion, is accelerating the deployment of electric vehicles. So I guess there's that.
Yep.
The other thing that was shared with us, which is also Donald Trump's contribution to decarbonization, was we were told at another point, thank you for what you have done in Greenland, because Europe had a huge dependency on Russian natural gas. And when Russia invaded Ukraine, we realized we could not be dependent on a despot who would weaponize energy policy to take land in Europe. And you've now reminded us that we have despots to our east and our west who would like to weaponize natural gas supply to take land in Europe. And so we're having much more serious conversations about weaning ourselves off natural gas instead of swapping one despot for another.
That's interesting.
As an American, I don't care what your politics is, there is no way not to be sad by that statement. On the other hand, if it helps Europe decarbonize faster, we all live on the same planet.
Well, yeah. At the beginning of the show, I talked about how just how humiliating it is that this man is our president. I mean, he goes there, and on top of being wrong about all these policies, America's word no longer means anything around the world. As you said, they had to agree to say they were going to purchase something they're never going to purchase, right? Just to play this game. It seems very silly.
And frankly, if it was just America's word, that'd be a small problem. The trouble is that the United States has been the chief defender and protector of the international order and in a rules-based international society. And I think there's this real, I think, a recognition and a concern in Europe that they've long recognized that the United States is not willing to hold ourselves to account to the same standards that they do. We are famously not a member of the International Criminal Court.
Right.
We support the International Criminal Court. If somebody who's indicted travels to the United States, we'll support extradition, but we don't really want us to be in it. We will use the World Trade Association to prosecute, dumping or excessive, punitive tariffs. But if we don't put our muscle behind it, it's not really there. And I think, there's this recognition in Europe that, okay, if anyone but the United States had been responsible for killing a bunch of girls at a school in Iran, that person would be brought up under war crimes in The Hague. Do we have the muscle to bring the United States up under those charges if the United States isn't going to defend that? If anyone but the United States had instituted the tariff regime that Trump had, in spite of multiple existing trade agreements that were signed and binding, would they be prosecuted under the WTO? And so there's this sense of, on the one hand, you've got a Europe that I think is going to make significant investments to be a much more stronger and independent, to try to be sort of a more equal weight to the United States. So you're seeing Europe put a lot more money into NATO. That's probably a good thing, right? Mm-hmm. You're seeing Europe have conversations about changing some of Mario Draghi has this report he issued about trying to deepen European capital markets, introduce more competition, take away some of the protectionism inside Europe. And there's much more appetite for that right now, even though it puts at risk some of the social safety net in Europe. But if it makes their economy a better counterweight to the United States, it makes them strong. Well, that's a strong Europe is in the United States' interest. But I think we're at this moment of, is that going to lead to a strong Europe that makes it easier to restore the sort of multilateral rules-based order, or is it going to lead to a stronger Europe that makes us all somewhat isolationist, and all of us are trying to figure out, which is how you got to World War I, right?
Yeah, this isn't the conversation I thought we were going to have. I've been having this conversation with Tom Nichols, the writer and I think, I lament the collapse of this order that has been there my whole life and been largely very good for America. And our country has largely been not perfect, but mostly benevolent force, even though unwilling to follow the same rules as everybody else.
Yeah, a Romanian ambassador told me years ago that the United States is the nicest bully in the world.
Right. Right. But I'm not sure in the world that somebody isn't always going to play that role.
Yeah.
I'm not sure, but it isn't going to be us anymore. We've opted out. We aren't leading the fight for freedom anywhere in the world. Not at home, not abroad. Europe is stepping up. But as you say, look, in history, when Europe was the great power in the world, it wasn't such a great world.
Yeah, well, I don't think we're any better or worse than Europe. I think we were a defender of a rules-based international order, and we had the military and the economy to back it up.
To do it. Yeah.
We still have the military and the economy to back it up, but if we're not going to defend it, it's not clear who else is going to.
That's right.
At one point in the trip, they said, the United States is really not being very nice right now, and China is being lovely. And these are crazy numbers. Europe is spending $600 million a day more on energy than they were before the United States started this imbroglio in Iran. And so you've got their economy, and they're saying, we don't have the fiscal room to do all the things we'd like to do. And so if China shows up and says, hey, we'll provide low cost electric vehicles and charging networks to go bring in there, how can you say no to that? And especially when the United States is saying, if you want stuff from us, there's going to be a lot of strings, and we're going to put tariffs on it, and we're going to we're gonna penalize you if your maritime rules comply with greenhouse gas emission schedules.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep. Well, I mean, and you didn't think you were going to Congress just to do foreign policy, but like the New York Times this morning has you, of course, in a conversation about Venezuela.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so Venezuela is also an interesting case in point about not playing by the rules. Here we went in, we were unclear in every possible way about what we did. But one possible explanation was it was just a law enforcement action to capture a potential, somebody who had a warrant out for his arrest. And so this entire armed forces went down there to support the Justice Department capturing a guy that's what Marco Rubio said at the time, but now he is the viceroy of the country under, as you said, like what? How does that work?
Well, look, I mean, Venezuela, much like Iran, we were never given any clear, consistent, or sufficient justification in Congress for why we should put our soldiers in harm's way to go and invade a sovereign nation.
Right.
The argument that was given, as you alluded to, by the White House was that Maduro had been indicted by a court in New York. Do you know anybody else who's been indicted by a court in New York?
Yeah, it's guy in the White House.
Because if that's the basis to invade a country and capture their leader, maybe that's what Trump is tweeting about this morning. Maybe that's what Iran is going to do, is just going to apply the Rubio
standards. Yeah.
Right. But even if that, let's just take them at their word and let's stipulate. And by the way, this was after they said that drug trafficking from Venezuela was an act of terrorism, and so therefore they could kill people in boats without due process,
which they're still doing.
Yeah, and so even for the purpose of this conversation, let's give them the benefit of the doubt that those are both legitimate. Neither of those, under U.S. or international law, gives you the right to seize the foreign assets of a sovereign nation.
Correct.
Right, and yet we know that the United States took control of Venezuelan oil. And when we had Secretary Bessent before the Financial Services Committee, it was the day after Rubio had testified before Senate Foreign Relations and said that they had the authority to take that, and the Treasury Department was overseeing the financial transfer. So I asked Secretary Bessent, under what authority? Because there's 91 specific statutory authorities Congress has given Treasury to be the trust account for other non-U.S. purposes.
Right.
And you can read all 91. None of them say anything about Venezuelan oil. And Bessent, it was sort of like talking to two criminals who hadn't courted their stories yet. Bessent, I don't think knew what I was talking about. He said they were doing this at the direction of the Department of State and Department of Defense, which was the opposite of what Rubio had said. I asked him if they had any audited record, and he said no, in spite of the fact that Rubio had said there was an audit. And then they also said that the money was going to a Qatari bank account, which is bizarre, because even if you have the authority in the Treasury Department to claim those assets, you do not have the authority to take that and put it in a foreign bank account with notoriously lax reporting standards, right? I'm not saying the money's being stolen, but if you were going to steal the money, that's a great way to do it. They have since testified, or at least said publicly, that money has now been moved to a U.S. account. We still have not gotten answers as to under what authority they're taking that.
Or an accounting of it. Right.
No, we still don't know where the account is. We still have not seen any kind of an audit report. And look, and again, I'm going to take the White House on their word. There are lots of bad people in Venezuela who are doing all sorts of illicit things. We should want to know whether the money that we're sending back into Venezuela, if we're doing this all on the up and up, where's it going to, right? Where's the audit? And that's before you get to wondering whether someone in the Trump orbit is taking a little, skim off the top. And even if we got all of those answers, I'm still left, just as a former, executive, saying, if I steal your car and then I sell it to somebody, the person who I sold it to is going to be pursued by whoever your outstanding car loan is with, saying this was a fraudulent conveyance and I'm still owed the debt. Venezuela has $200 billion of debt on its economy, and their largest single creditor is the Chinese government. And so if I am a buyer of Venezuelan oil, I am essentially participating in a fraudulent conveyance. And so I think that's why a lot of the big US oil majors have stayed out of making those investments, because it's not clear that they have clean title. We had, before this whole thing with Basent, we'd sent a letter to a bunch of the oil majors just pointing out to them that the time it will take to build the assets to extract, refine, and deliver Venezuelan oil is more time than remains in the Trump administration, but less time before the statute of limitations runs out on those crimes.
That's good.
Right.
That's very good. Yeah. I mean, look, there isn't a way. I've given up trying to understand the conflicting testimony that you guys are eliciting from Trump appointees as anything rational, as an explanation of government policy, because it is consistently impossible to square what one of them says with what the next one says, which leads me to believe it's all whatever whim Donald Trump has at the moment and tells somebody, and they have no, the structure of our government is gone. It's just like the boss says.
I mean,
And Scott Bessent strikes me as an idiot, but that's
well,
different.
I mean, I quote him all the time, but it's Yates, right? That the best lack all conviction and the worst are filled with passionate intensity. Stephen Miller's in the worst crowd. Marco Rubio is in the best crowd. But anybody who's in Trump's cabinet was not selected because of their patriotism or their integrity or their willingness to challenge the executive. They were selected because he knew that they would fold like a Montgomery chair. And so you've got these people who are sitting there saying, what do I have to do to make Donald Trump happy? That's why they're there. And these are not people of the character or strength, even if they, have a strong set of moral values, they don't have the backbone to carry them out.
Yeah.
Like Marco Rubio, when he was a senator, was a pretty good foreign policy guy.
That's what people tell me.
The stuff,
That's what people tell me.
Scott Bessent is not a dummy, but they are
Right.
they are all
Implicit.
They're cowards and sycophants essentially, and that's why they got the job.
Well, so let me ask you, because we're running out of time, and this conversation took a lovely turn. I love it, but not what I thought. But so people are always concerned when they talk about when the Democrats win, when we take it back. Are we going to be cowards? Are we going to play let's make a deal with these guys, or do we have the guts to get a real accountability, a real record of what has happened, and hold, and whether that is changing the way we let the Supreme Court decide, and holding Trump administration folks accountable so that we can clear enough space to move the country forward.
Well, so let me maybe answer that by circling back to how we started. There's more diversity in the Congress than just two parties, and the two parties always do the same thing, right? We have lots of people with lots of different perspectives.
Yes.
And
Big country.
I think the degree to which a Democratic controlled House can do what needs to be done depends substantially on who are the Democrats who are in that House in the next cycle, which is a function of all the elections that are going on right now. And, I think we're at a moment where I think there's a broad consensus that certainly for the first time in my congressional career, which is fairly bipartisan, that the institutions are not working in the way that they were designed to work. Right? That's true for the far left. It's true for the far right. It's true for an awful lot of folks all across that whole range. And I think that the question that I think we're answering one primary at a time is, if you have these institutions in need of repair, do we elect carpenters to fix them, or do we elect arsonists to burn it down?
Well, that's
and I think if we have if we have a lot of people who are sitting there saying, look, we need to make reforms to make the Supreme Court work better and be more politically neutral. We need to pass reforms to make sure that we protect our independent institutions, from the Fed to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to the FCC, and protect them from some of the excesses. Having that sort of like building mentality, I think, gives us the ability to come out of this stronger. But I do get worried when we say what we really need in this moment is somebody who has no experience as a legislator, but speaks really well and has an interesting bio. Right.
Well,
I say this as someone who had no legislative experience.
Democrats got burned badly.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah. But I think it's just really important for us to make sure that we, give us in Congress who want to build, who want to restore, who want to improve these, a team committed to that proposition.
Yeah. I have confidence in our voters. I do. I think you're going to get a really interesting class of people.
Yeah. We certainly did in Illinois. I think the Illinois primaries, we elected builders across the board.
Yep. And there'll be a few people who want to tear things down, but you only need a few Madisons to really think about the structure of government, but there have to be a few. Yeah. So we're lucky you're there. We're lucky you're there.
Well, that's elite company, but I'll take the praise.
Yeah. Thank you for your time, as always. It's a pleasure.
Thank you, Edwin.
Bye.
Welcome back to Edwin Eisendrath's It's the Democracy, Stupid, on WCPT 820.
Okay. It's been a wild hour and a half already. Wow. Yeah, and I think it's only going to get wilder because I'm joined now by Alex Aronson, who is co-founder and runs the organization Court Accountability. It's a topic we talk about a lot here. His mission is to make our judiciary work for us and the rule of law, as opposed to for dark money and secret vacations. He is a frequent collaborator in this work with Lisa Graves, who was on just a few weeks ago. So you can get some notion of where he's coming from. Alex, it's good to talk to you.
Thanks, Edwin. It's great to be back.
Belatedly, I think ideas that you and I have talked about since the day we met, and both of us have been thinking about since before then, are finally becoming ripe. In particular, the idea of taking back the Constitution from a corrupt and political Supreme Court seems now to be on the minds of lots of Americans.
I think that's right. And it's not the first time we've been in this position, but it does seem that something about this term, the extent to which this court has really been the central engine facilitator of the Trump administration's Project 2025 agenda, its culmination of some decades-long projects, like its campaign to really gut and invalidate the Voting Rights Act and to establish the unitary executive theory as constitutional doctrine. I think the writing is on the wall for people who have been holding out hope that this is an institution that can still be, at the end of the day, a court, a guardrail against authoritarianism. I think the realization is dawning that this court is, in fact, the driving force of authoritarianism in this country, and that we're going to have to do something serious about it.
Yeah, I mean, the right wing has had problems with the court when it was doing its job, so they sought to take it over. The left outsourced the political work of social progress to lawyers, thinking the court was its ally. So the left has taken longer to understand, but I think now that they see the court is no longer, it's not an ally, it's an enemy of many of the things we celebrated on the 4th of July, that they're willing to take steps that I think no one was willing to take before.
I think that's right, but it's a very complicated relationship that the liberal left, the progressive movement, and the legal profession writ large, I think, has with the courts, because, in the absence of true multiracial democracy in America, for much of the 20th century, the progressive movement really needed the courts to reinforce the imperfect progress that the social movements were making. And so, by virtue of that reliance on the court, I think we came to over-rely on the court. We come to think of the court as the place we go for the creation and guarantee of rights and freedoms. That's not democracy, right? The justices of the Supreme Court are appointed by presidents, increasingly influenced by outside interests. We've documented hundreds of millions of dollars over decades spent to influence the composition of the courts. And, it ends up in a system like we've got now of just concentrated power, the consolidation of constitutional power in the hands of this judiciary, leaving everybody else out to dry. And it connects to what you were just talking about with Representative Caston, who I think almost uniquely among House members really understands these institutional and separation of powers problems and understands that the place we have come to is the very intentional product of a systematic campaign to disempower Congress as the most democratic of the three branches of the federal government. And so the Federalist Society donors and the fossil fuel interests that funded this project, they understood that constitutional design, and they understood that if they could concentrate power within the judiciary and disempower the Congress, as we saw the court do so dangerously and dramatically this term, they could just simply entrench their power permanently and keep their toxically unpopular agenda alive despite its deep unpopularity.
Well, toxic is an actually appropriate word because among the other laws they gutted are ones that have to do with the environment. So, yeah, it's certainly about corporate.
That's.
Go ahead, Alex.
Sorry, I was going to say, the fossil fuel industry and the billionaire fossil fuel money is the root of this. It is the financial engine of the authoritarian project that captured the courts. Yep. And all of the other sort of social movements that have been developed to sustain this power and focus on judicial capture, such as the effort to really develop an anti-abortion base in the evangelical Christian movement, which was not a thing when Roe versus Wade was decided.
No, it was a strategy.
This is a sustained and designed project funded by the fossil fuel industry to eliminate government regulation and allow their negative externalities on our communities.
Yeah, it's not a well-told story, but I think everybody should know it. It's fascinating and terrifying. We have this mismatch right now, and I think it is confusing people. This mismatch between we see district state courts largely doing their jobs in the last couple of years, certainly this last year, while the Supreme Court is largely doing Trump's job. And in some cases, the 6 right-wing judges have claimed that every other federal judge in the country is just plain wrong, doesn't know how to read the Constitution because they're so radical. And so we still hold out a lot of confidence in the judicial system. But you've been pretty clear in your work that the effort to undermine the whole judiciary is ongoing. It isn't limited to the Supreme Court. Do you want to talk? And it isn't even limited to the judges. It includes the people who go to court, so the AGs around the country, and the evidence that gets developed through the FBI. Do you want to talk about the efforts to put more Aline Cannons and Emile Beauvais and Kash Patels through the system in Congress and what you've seen the Senate do?
Certainly, and this was, experience that I have firsthand. I was chief counsel to Senator Whitehouse on the Senate Judiciary Committee from, I was on his staff from 2017 through 2022. So I saw the culmination of the Federalist Society decades-long project to install aligned judges onto the federal bench, which of course brought along with it the destruction of some of these long-standing Senate norms about how we confirm judges. Mitch McConnell, famously getting rid of many of these long-standing norms to jam his judges through. And what we saw was the selection of judges that were simply different in kind from the previous eras, where the Federalist Society cabal had, learned their lesson with folks like David Souter, and they had come to these mantras like "no more suitors." And so what we saw was the installation of movement zealots, people who had shown through various ways integrated into these dark money networks that you described, the development of intellectual capital in the academies and public interest, so-called public interest litigation on behalf of fossil fuel interests. And so we saw these new breed of judges being installed onto the courts, and it did tremendous damage to the courts, particularly at the circuit court level, where the circuits have tremendous policymaking authority right under the Supreme Court. And my organization actually did a sort of a comprehensive analysis of all of the litigation involving challenges to President Trump and his administration's policies since the start of this second term. And what it showed us was a really interesting and fractured picture of what the rule of law looks like across these levels of our federal judiciary. At the district court level, we see tremendous consensus, bipartisan consensus. It's actually Republican-appointed, non-Trump Republican-appointed judges that are ruling against the Trump administration at the highest clip, even more than Democratic-appointed judges in the district courts. When you only look at the Trump-appointed judges at the district court level, they almost, essentially reliably rule for Trump. And then when you look at the circuit courts, where partisan politics, really came to bear, particularly in that last Trump administration, and it just breaks down completely along partisan lines. So Democratic-appointed judges are striking down Trump's agenda, and Republican-appointed judges are upholding it. And then when it gets to the Supreme Court, largely through the shadow docket, where the American public has no insight into how the law is being created, and these cases have tremendous consequence. One example I think is important that it gets forgotten a lot is the Friday night shadow docket order that allowed Elon Musk's Doge to have access to every American's Social Security records, and those Social Security records were subsequently leaked and stolen. And so now we've got all of our, most sensitive data in the hands of God knows who. And so, all of this combines to create a system. And this is something I do is I'll branch off when I'm making a point, and then I will forget where I've started from. So I apologize for that. But here we are.
You're right on target, because what we're talking about here is that, the public, you read this in journalists a lot, say, the lower courts are holding, but the Supreme Court. The lower court's holding, but the Supreme Court. And I don't want people to lose sight of the fact that the effort to do to the entire judiciary what got done to the Supreme Court is still in full motion.
Full motion. I mean, and even worse. And you reminded me of the last piece of my point, which is how the administration is faring at the Supreme Court and on the shadow docket. And they have ruled for this administration fully 80% of the time. So while they get big headlines with cases that they know they can get great PR with and bolster their public legitimacy by striking down birthright citizenship or protecting the Fed, even as they allow the administration to fire the independent FTC head,
We'll come back to those two in a second.
They maintain this reputation of legitimacy while they just entrench their agenda and drive it forward and forward.
Yeah, on those two cases, Slaughter and the birthright citizenship, I don't think it did their reputation any good. A 5-4 reading of the text that is about as clear as any text in the entire Constitution says the rule of law is in deep, deep trouble in their hands. And the Slaughter decision, which, as you said earlier, is all about cementing this idea that the executive branch really is nothing other than a kingdom, this unitary executive theory, really is, as a student of government, the most terrible idea. But it has also got it's not really, it's such a werid legal theory, too, that it just doesn't really hold up as credible.
It's authoritarian. Authoritarian by design, a very, very intentional product, a novel creation of Ed Meese's Justice Department. There's this really fascinating exchange in a 1984 oral argument where the Reagan Justice Department was trying to plant these seeds and establish unitary executive theory as law. And the Justice Department lawyer went to the Supreme Court and tried to make the argument. And Justice O'Connor said, well, that's a really sort of strange and novel theory you're raising here, counsel. I can't seem to put my finger on it in any of our precedent. And now that theory, that frivolous, invented theory that had no support in any of our country's precedent, our Supreme Court's precedent, is constitutional doctrine that establishes effectively a monarchy.
Yeah. And again, we've just been talking about the judges, but they're also, the judicial system, the actors aren't just judges. They are U.S. attorneys, they are FBI agents. They, that all, I mean, I am living in a city where we recently had this thing called the Broadview Six, where we learned that the Justice Department lied to the grand jury to get, fraudulent indictments. So the whole system of law has been corrupted by these guys.
Yeah, it's fundamental corruption and autocracy, and this is what you get when you. I mean, it points to this deep irony and hypocrisy and sort of where the Republican Party has come from, this party of small government libertarianism. But what we see in Project 2025 and in this weaponization of prosecution, as the example that you raised, is government maximalism, right? It's infiltration of government and leveraging of government power to suppress dissent and entrench permanent rule.
Yeah. And just for those of you who are listening and care about language, Alex used the word maximalist here about use of government. A century ago, they just called it totalitarian. Same idea. Okay, we've talked about where we are. Let's talk about how we dig out, because there's some interesting ideas out there. I mean, I never heard of this thing called the exceptions clause until you mentioned it to me once, which drove me scurrying to my Constitution to read it and understand it. But that's not, I mean, so talk about the things we can do going forward should we be fortunate enough to regain control of our government for a period of time.
Yeah, so this is really interesting because the place we've come to, and it connects to the conversation we had earlier about the liberal legal movement and our complex relationship with the courts and the relationship of the courts and democracy. But we've all come to sort of accept that Marbury versus Madison, the sort of seminal case establishing judicial review, means that the Supreme Court has the last, final, and exclusive word on what the Constitution means. But that's not really what Marbury versus Madison meant. And in other moments in our history, social movements and political leaders, most notably Abraham Lincoln and the abolitionist movement, understood that this was a threat of tyranny. Abraham Lincoln said in his first inaugural address.
Alex, I got to interrupt you because I'm having trouble hearing you. Hang on, you're cutting in and out,
sorry.
and this is too interesting for that. So let's see. Let's try it again.
All right. Can you hear me any better now?
A little bit. You're still coming in and out a little bit.
All right.
And I don't know.
I'm not sure there's much I can do about it. I could hop on a Zoom if that'd be easier.
Yeah, sure. Paul, can you send him a Zoom link? All right, we're gonna do that, and while he's hopping on Zoom, I'm just gonna take a minute to do the layman's version of Marbury versus Madison with you, because that's where we're going to start. Way back in the early years of our country, there was a fight about patronage. And the incoming administration, Jefferson didn't want to have to hire all these people that got offered jobs at the end of the Adams administration. And the court said, you know what, you passed this law, but we don't have the constitutional authority to do what you want us to do. We're washing our hands of this question because the things you want us to do are actually not constitutional. We don't have the constitutional power to do it. So in that interesting way, what he did was set a precedent that says the Supreme Court gets to decide what's constitutional, period. And that set this whole thing called judicial review in place. And kind of interesting, but it does mean that the Supreme Court has this enormous power, right? Because it can say to Congress, oh, that thing that you want to do, well, you can't because the Constitution says you can't. And for a long time, that worked for the benefit of those folks who were holding people enslaved. And then after the Civil War, for a while, it worked for the benefit of those states that were involved in Jim Crow. And then in my lifetime, well, for the last 100 years, the courts had a different point of view about the Constitution. And they've said, you know what, we're going to overturn laws that we think uh, do not fit the Constitution as we see it. And that's the era that Alex was talking about, where left-leaning lawyers and the courts formed a kind of partnership to move America in a direction towards civil rights and civil liberties. And now we see the court once again going in a different way, but even taking even more power into its hands, because they are really untethered from the text of the Constitution that they so religiously say they are wedded to. When four of nine of them, 4 out of 5, can't read the words of the 14th Amendment on birthright citizenship to mean if you're born here, you get to be a citizen here. All right, Alex, are you back? Okay, let me just tell you, right on the 14th Amendment, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and the state where they reside. 4 of them could not read that sentence and say, if you're born here, you're a citizen. And the implications of that, just so we're clear, if you're not a citizen because you're born here, then somebody gets to decide whether you're a citizen or not. Can you imagine that giving that power to the government? That is something that the framers of the Constitution absolutely didn't want to have happen. The government can say you're not a citizen, you don't get the protections of being a citizen. I worked in countries around the world where governments did that. In the Middle East, they award people citizenship and they take it away if they don't like you. And then you don't have the rights and privileges of people who live there. That is the power that these guys are seeking, and 4 justices on the Supreme Court want to give it to them. Right? Kavanaugh, the man who said it's okay to stop people just because of the way they look. So this is it's a really unbelievably dangerous time where they have taken on this enormous extra power in the way they view their judicial review. And Alex is back, so he can talk about that more.
Hey, Evan, sorry about that.
So when we left off, you were saying that Marbury versus Madison might be open for review.
Well, I think Marbury versus Madison is not necessarily open for review. I think our understanding of Marbury versus Madison needs to be updated and corrected, right? Because we've come to understand it as this announcement of exclusive dominion over constitutional control for the court. It is emphatically the province and the duty of the judiciary to say what the law is. And the question in that case was whether the Constitution superseded a statute. That's the question. It's the role of the court to say, actually, if the Constitution conflicts with the statute, and the court has a role in interpreting the Constitution, then the Constitution supersedes. That is different from the assertion that the court's determination as to the meaning of the Constitution is final and binding, as to the issue resolved. The other branches have a say-so in this question. The people.
That is really interesting.
It's really
interesting, because the court says all the Congress can do is make a statute, and they have nothing to say about the Constitution. We get to decide. And what the court has said about the executive branch is they can do whatever the hell they want because they are kings. So it cut Congress out entirely, but it leaves the court as the only check on the king, and they're much too slow.
Right, and they have concocted a system whereby they sit upon top of everything, and they have created a system of unaccountable executive power also, except that it is accountable to them, such that when Joe Biden is president and passes regulations that they don't like, relieving students of student loan obligations, they strike it down. But when a Project 2025 administration is in place, they simply allow it to take place, right? And so it's important, I think, to understand that all of the damage and unconstitutional behavior and conduct of the Trump administration, of MAGA Republicans in the red states, it's all downstream of the Roberts Court, of powers and immunities that this court granted them. And so our problem as a movement right now is that we're too focused on fighting these TIE fighters, right? The Roberts Court is the Death Star. Trump and the MAGA Republicans are TIE fighters. And if we started to train our power on the Death Star, there's actually a lot we could do to disempower the court and take our power back to reclaim our Constitution. And that's what Lincoln understood. And it's what the exceptions clause actually opens the door to. Because what the exceptions clause is, it's a provision in Article 3 of the Constitution, which creates the courts. The first article of the Constitution creates the Congress. It's the first branch. So we think of these branches as co-equal. Jamie Raskin is great on this. They're not co-equal. The Congress is the first branch. And the judiciary doesn't come until the last. It's the third branch. And the third branch of the Constitution creates a very narrow band of original jurisdiction that the Supreme Court owns, that nobody can take away from it. And then it gives it appellate jurisdiction subject to such regulations and exceptions as Congress shall make. And so that gives Congress the power to decide what the court can hear. And 99% of this court's docket is under that discretionary appellate jurisdiction.
Right.
And so on a question like Citizens United or Buckley versus Vallejo, which I think we often talk about Citizens United when we should be talking about Buckley versus Vallejo, the principle that money equals speech, the foundational and central pillar of the authoritarian project that broke our political system. This is something that is, the Roberts Court in Justice Kennedy's opinion completely wiped away broad 100,000 pages of congressional findings establishing the corrupting influence of independent expenditures. They decided as a factual matter that independent expenditures could not be corrupting. And everything about what has happened to our country since then has disproven that, has made that assertion, which was laughable on its face at the time, completely incredible.
Roberts is 0 for many on this. He also said there's no racism in America, and God, we can get rid of the Voting Rights Act, and no one would try and racial gerrymander. Also proven completely wrong. He took factual records and threw them out.
100%. But the Citizens United, actually, the question is actually more dangerous, and the situation there is so dangerous and highlights this problem of concentrated and final judicial supremacy, because there's no way to reopen this question. Even though 87% of the country wants that decision overturned, there's no way to bring that question back up. The First Amendment's meaning is fixed, that money equals speech. And this is why the Democratic Party is broken, right? Because every reform they offer, every promise they tried to deliver is offered upon the constraints of a system that is fundamentally broken by this authoritarian court.
Right. So how do we take it back?
So we just reject the finality and supremacy of the court's constitutional word. We should overturn Citizens United by statute, and we could strip their jurisdiction to decide the case. If they took the case anyway and tried to strike it down or frustrate enforcement of the law, they would be acting outside of their jurisdiction. They would be going rogue. I think there are real strategic questions about how Congress should think about using this power. It's a very maximal power. People think that the most sort of extreme and effective way to deal with the court crisis is expanding the court. I actually think the jurisdiction stripping power is a much more maximalist assertion of congressional authority.
It's been done before a couple of times, right?
It's done all the time. Yeah. It's done a lot. It actually, and actually it's done in ways that show you some of its pitfalls and its dangers. Just this term, the court decided a case that precluded, it involved a statute that stripped judicial review using this power, a bipartisan statute, stripped judicial review of determinations made by the DHS secretary on the temporary protected status program. And the Supreme Court said, Congress stripped the court's jurisdiction. We can't review the secretary's determination. These immigrants are out of luck. The TPS, protectees are out. And so there are real pitfalls. I think we shouldn't overstate the concern. The reason that the right-wing legal project invested in capturing the court was that its social and political and economic agenda is deeply unpopular. I don't think we should fear what would happen in a democracy. I don't think
if we did that. Okay, so I'm down with that. Let me ask the inverse question that a non-lawyer like me can't understand. Is it also true that if the Congress gives the court jurisdiction over something, can the court refuse to take it?
Well, that was the question in Marbury versus Madison, actually.
Yeah.
The court refused to enforce the writ, and so they could come up with all sorts of ways. And I think this is a reality check that we must reckon with, even as we consider really potent tools like jurisdiction stripping, because we are not dealing with a court that will honor even the most constitutional regulations on its authority. Justice Alito has said that the Constitution has no provision that gives Congress any authority to regulate the court. He's rewriting the Constitution to create his own immunity.
Well,
So
then I'm down with this experiment. Let us pass a wonderful law that changes about 5 Supreme Court decisions, Buckley versus Vallejo, right?
Shelby County, Janus, right?
And put
Dobbs, a
and
huge,
all the
huge,
voting rights ones,
right? A
right?
huge,
Calais and
Calais, and right, a huge set of statutory cases that don't even need this sort of constitutional contest, where the court, understanding that the Congress was broken because it had broken it, would not be able to correct its willful misinterpretations of their statutes, of the people's statutes.
so well, let's try that, and then we need an executive who's willing to stand up for it and
We
say, no matter what the Supreme Court says, if you violate campaign finance law, I'm going to put you in jail.
100%.
Yeah.
And so the question for our next nominee, we need the president, the next nominee for the Democratic Party needs to understand this intimately, that there is no future for American democracy unless we have a contest for constitutional power with the Roberts Court. And so the question for that nominee is not what reform of the court do you support? It is, will you take back what the Roberts Court stole from us? And what will you do when they say no?
That, Alex, since we are up against the hour, is going to be the end question to leave on, but it's a great one. Thank you for your time, and thank you for jumping media so we could hear it.
I'm so sorry about the technical difficulties. It's always such a pleasure to join you, Edwin. Thank you.
Talk to you again soon. Bye. Bye. All right, we'll take a break for the news. We'll be back in just a couple seconds.
Welcome back to Edwin Eisendrath's It's the Democracy, Stupid on WCPT 820.
All right, everybody. It's been a fabulous show today, but it's ending on a high note because Will Bunch, the Philadelphia Inquirer's, I don't know what adjective to use here. Fabulous, trenchant, poetic observer of America is back. Hi, Will.
Hey, Edwin, how's it going?
Great. This show has been more radical than most. I mean, I had a water
good.
scientist on talking about, what we need to do. And the only thing in the way is this insane politics. I got a congressman on saying that, the administration is crazy and we need to take back our country. And I had a constitutional scholar on saying that the next president of the United States has to say the mission is to take the Constitution back after John Roberts stole it. So this is where we are.
Okay, it's gonna be hard. It's gonna be hard to top all of that. But
you have been looking at ICE, so yeah, you got plenty to talk about. Yeah.
Yeah, and the crazy part, it's funny. I'm actually started working on because it's thundering and raining here in Philadelphia, so I'm starting early on tomorrow's column. And I'm looking at the craziness. And I mean, I was just reading up on all the similarities between Trump and Caligula, it's the insane Roman emperor, and who, among other things, also had the same insane fears of being assassinated, that we're seeing this weekend with Trump. So there's a lot going on. But, yeah, I definitely want to talk to you about ICE because that's an important story. And the thing is, ICE doesn't want us talking about them, right? So we should be talking about them.
I just, before we get to ICE, I want to say, if my history is correct, Caligula actually was assassinated.
Yeah. Well, and I guess I'll have to use this line in my column, but the old saying, Edwin, that just because you're paranoid doesn't mean there's not somebody out to get you, right? And Caligula. Well, Caligula made a lot of enemies. He humiliated a lot of people in the Senate. You could say, although it doesn't exactly translate, but he made enemies in his own party, basically.
he also tried to start some irrational foreign wars and encounters. And yes, I mean,
He thought everything was about himself. That
yeah,
sounds familiar.
I mean, Donald Trump does have arguably, I think, a higher assassination risk than other presidents because, he started a lot of wars for no reason. Number one, he's unleashed a lot of violence that we're going to be talking about with ICE and other ways on U.S. soil, and violence is always secular. But I mean, I certainly hope. I deplore political violence, and I've always said.
I know you do.
Trump. Yeah, and I've always said with Trump, as much as we deplore everything he's done, we want to live in a world where he can ultimately be brought to justice. And it certainly helps to do that if he remains alive, and
yes,
so we can hold him.
Our future is much stronger
for all of his
deal
crimes.
with them in legal ways. Yes, absolutely.
Absolutely.
All right, so talk about ICE. I saw the most frightening image of ICE pretending to be journalists on top of everything else now. So we have ICE pretending to be journalists at the same time they're going after New York Times reporters who are actual journalists. Really frightening.
Yeah, in fact, I would kind of like to write about that. I did read the story. I think it was from Connecticut Insider, and
yes,
it's one of those stories where it certainly looks like something is happening, but since these people who are presumably fake journalists wouldn't talk and ICE wouldn't talk, it's very difficult to confirm that what appears to be happening is actually happening. But it certainly appears that ICE is sending people out as fake journalists, and what they're doing is recording scenes where people have gathered to protest, and this footage that they gather could be used against citizens. Clearly they're going. I read another disturbing piece last week that it was from Wired. I think that the Inspector General in Homeland Security or the internal watchdog within the agency isn't going after these rogue agents who've shot and killed American citizens or decent law-abiding people like Lorenzo Salgado, but they're going after critics of ICE, protesters, critics, people. So that's just the unbelievably dangerous environment that we're in right now.
It's very frightening. I mean, we've seen this in cities at different times in our history where rogue police do terrible things and protect each other and then go after the witnesses. But it's never been, never, even in Chicago, when our police force and neighborhoods had their worst ever relations, it was never something that the mayor, that the person in charge said, this is a good thing, this is what we want to do. We're going to go after people in these communities. They're the enemy. It never happened before. Now we have a president saying these people are our enemy. We're going to go after them. If you protect them, you're our enemy too. And we are going to protect our own no matter what crimes they commit. That has never happened.
Yeah. And, in my last column, I wrote about, a couple things, but the main thing I wrote about was the killing of Lorenzo Salgado.
Will you tell people about that? Because it's still new enough.
Yeah.
Tell people about that.
Right. Well, that's the thing. I think there was kind of this perception out there, and it's kind of understandable. We've had a couple phases of this mass deportation effort by the Trump regime now, right? So in the early days, well, I'd say we've had like maybe 4 phases because, in the first couple months of Trump's presidency, ICE was still kind of doing things the old way, that they were going on their lists of people who have, actually committed crimes and are in this country. And, Steve Miller and those people were saying, wow, this is not enough. We promised we were going to deport 1 million people a year. Why aren't you going in the Home Depots? Why aren't you going, into the parking lot at 7-Eleven or whatever and just picking people up and doing that? And so you got this phase 2, and they found this ICE commander, Greg Pavino, who loved doing that sort of thing and was this flamboyant swashbuckler who gave names to his operations, Operation Charlotte's Web or whatever, and was always on social media.
Yeah, terrible.
Yeah, right. That's what you had in Chicago, Midway Blitz, and the whole thing, the naming, the videos, the high profile, and I think they were maybe too dumb to realize how many Americans found that horrendous, and so horrendous that they had to do something about it. And so you saw an amazing resistance type operation rise up, where people were meeting in churches and handing out whistles and writing up brochures to drop on people's doors, telling them not to let ICE in their house, and you start seeing these patrols, people communicating on signal, and it all came to a head in Minneapolis. And, with the killing of Renee Good and Alex Pretty, that just put things over top. So then we entered this third phase where they said, okay, we're pulling our people back from Minneapolis in that area. Greg Bavino is out. Kristi Noem is out. Corey Lewandowski, who came with the package, is out. All of these like cartoon villains are going away. We're going to put in this senator, Mark Wayne Mullen, to run DHS, and that thing that we were doing with the turning warehouse, turning big lots warehouses into concentration camps. We're basically, they didn't say we're not going to totally not do that, but we're going to scale back on that. And I think they wanted people to, part of the idea was they wanted people to ease up. They wanted the whistle patrols and all that to stand down a little bit. That it's like, okay, we're easing up on this whole thing. And the thing is, they were not equipped to ease up. I mean, meanwhile, over the last 2 years, there have been 2 extra appropriations for DHS and ICE that have totaled just a staggering amount of money, to about $240 billion, give or take, in extra money that's been given to these agencies, basically for mass deportation. And thousands of new agents have been hired. They've gone through kind of a rush training. They're hitting the streets. And now we're in a very dangerous phase, because what they're doing is, now with these new bulked up staffing in different cities, they're not having the press releases. They're not giving operations names, but they're going out more often, trying to arrest more people. And they're showing up at people when people show up for their immigration check-ins. They're arresting them. They're trying to find ways to pull people over in traffic stops. They're trying to make it a little bit less blatant, but they're arresting a lot more people. The New York Times reported recently that over the 5-day stretch right before that story was written, they've arrested 2,000 people a day. Now remember, the mass deportation goal of 1 million people a year translates to 3,000 people a day. So you're 2/3 of the way towards that kind of pogrom type goal of this horrific mass deportation. You're starting to see detention counts, which had gone down, are going back up again. And so it's in this context that all of a sudden you get the shocking news out of Houston about the shooting of Lorenzo Salgado Araujo, who you couldn't create in a lab a more undeserving victim of all of this. Yes, yes, of course, like millions of people, he was an undocumented immigrant. He came here in the 90s, which is when you had a big surge of people from Mexico coming into Texas and places like that, looking for a better life for their family. And he did what he set out to do. He was doing essential labor, making Houston a better city by building homes as the city grew, and you had that enormous expansion down there, and he became basically a home builder, kind of a leader, a guy who organized his own crews to build homes. Very focused on being a family, no criminal record, total family man, got married and had 3 sons, and very big on education. All three of his sons went to college, and when I say went to college, I mean, his oldest son went to the University of Houston and became a teacher. His second son went to an elite school, Tufts University up near Boston. I'm not really sure where the third son went to school, but this guy was like the dictionary picture of the American dream, and it made
And
no
ICE wasn't
sense
even
that
looking
ICE would,
for him.
yeah, well, I was going to say, when the initial, I was just starting to say that, when the initial reports came out about this, it didn't add up from the start. And like, why would ICE have been looking to apprehend this man in particular? And like, as you said, just as everybody has followed this story for the last year and a half, has come to see again and again and again, ICE's initial account of what happened was just undercut by massive amounts of evidence and backpedaling to some degree by DHS. They admitted that. Here's what I say. They said they were targeting 2 other people who, I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think they were Nicaraguan, but they were not Mexican even. They were from a different Latin American nation. And I think what's really happening is I think they go out in the morning and they have like 2 kind of bad guys, people with criminal records on their list, right? And they say, well, we're targeting these guys today. But then what they really do is they pull over every brown skin person who fits a certain pattern. The fact that yeah, right. The fact that Mr. Salgado was picked up 3 other workers and was driving a van. He fit a certain profile of undocumented immigrants, which he was. He was an undocumented immigrant. That's what drives the construction industry in cities like Houston. But that's who they were. So they knew what they were doing, I think, when they pulled him over. And the thing is, they invented this story that, he tried to ram our vehicle and that we had to fire in self-defense. First of all, there are videos from the scene. There's no evidence that the ICE vehicles, I guess there were 2 vehicles involved, were struck by his car. And then, and I'm kind of surprised this came out, but, I remember there were 3 other people in the van who were apprehended and taken into custody by ICE, but they did get an attorney, and their attorney was able to meet with the 3 of them or communicate with the 3 of them separately. And all of them told the same story, which is that nothing happened like the way ICE said it did. They basically pulled alongside the van, and when Mr. Salgado tried to make a U-turn, again, these are unmarked vans, remember? These are not like marked police cars with, you're speeding and a siren goes off and they want you to pull over. These are unmarked cars that had surrounded him. And, he made a U-turn and started driving a little bit in the other direction. And they jumped out of the car and shot, basically. And, he was shot in the side of his stomach, then thrown to the ground, handcuffed, and he bled to death. It's just horrible. It's horrible that would happen to anybody. Horrible that would happen to anybody, but particularly this like good family man. He was only 52 years old. He had a lot of his life ahead of him.
Tragedy happened. and we have a government that is trigger happy, that is hunting for people of a certain um, that look a certain way, and if they kill somebody else, it's a it's collateral damage. But then they try and defend it, and they lie about who we are. Um,
And let's not forget, I mean, after Renee Goodenow Expredi, there was like, oh, well, these people need to start wearing body cameras. Well, guess what? They were not wearing their body cameras, and when they were pressed about that, they said, oh, it was those democratic shutdowns that caused this, ignoring the fact that they just got $240 billion.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Liars everywhere. I related to this tangentially, I was recently in North Carolina, and I spoke to someone about their beliefs in the country, and he told me um, Democrats are all communists who want to take control of the private sector. Doctors are wrong to prescribe pills when living right is what makes us healthy. Too many black folks don't want to work. Mexicans want to work, but enough of them are criminals, and that's who Donald Trump is rounding up. And Barack Obama was responsible for the 2008 financial crisis. 5 things that are absolutely not facts. They're just wrong.
Yeah. Well,
and so I want to ask, you're a
Barack
journalist. How is it that he wasn't even president? Right. How is it that Americans are so? I mean, is this all? I mean, we want to attribute to a lot of reasons, but is this really just all you watch Fox News all the time and your brain goes to mush? You like cognitive surrender to the lies?
Yeah, well, I think it's twofold. I mean, I mean, to believe these lies, you have to want to believe them on some level. I think
you have to want to believe
them. because when you look at the broad sweep of American history and just the ugly kind of back currents that we've always had, whether it was the undoing of the Civil War and the Reconstruction in the late 19th century, the resistance to civil rights. I mean, there's always been, an element of small-mindedness and a belief, in the superiority of whiteness or the patriarchy or Christianity or whatever. I mean, those strains have always existed. What you haven't had is, a certain type of media that was created to not dispel that, but reinforce it, right? So, I mean, it's almost too obvious to state, but like you said, almost everything that guy spouted off is something that can be heard around the clock on Fox News or talk radio or
a lot of other places. Sure.
Increasingly,
and yet the facts, as you described them, in this case, are so antithetical. I don't know how someone who's trapped believing that stuff can even make space in their brain to hear the facts. And that's heartbreaking and dangerous.
What's been interesting the last 18 months, and I mean, one hopes there would be over time more of this, but the longer this mass deportation goes on, the more likely it's going to affect someone someone who's in your life. And we've seen so many stories over the last 18 months, from like small towns in Missouri or Indiana or places like that, where somebody who's a member of a popular church in town, or somebody who runs a restaurant that's really popular, and all the customers love the family that runs this restaurant or whatever, and then one of these people goes to an immigration check-in or something, and they get arrested and deported, and their family is ripped apart. And a lot of middle-class folks, and if they're middle class and they're white and they live in one of those states like Indiana or Missouri, it's almost certain they voted for Trump, right? But these folks, when they see it's this person, it's like, well, wait a minute. I guess it's not all criminals that they're deporting. When I arrested Trump, I didn't want him to deport, my favorite restaurateur or the guy who sits next to me in church. I didn't want that guy or that woman deported. I just wanted bad guys. And, Trump has lost support. He's losing support, and there's a bunch of reasons for that, and certainly the economy is a big part of that. But I think also, they haven't totally destroyed our ability to think rationally yet. There still is some critical thinking out there, and whatever's left, people are seeing that this isn't, in the reality of this isn't what they thought. Thought it was. Mass deportation is. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, Americans we're not by nature haters and cruel. And, we're tough competitors for sure, but people generally are not haters and not cruel. And these guys have tried to make us so scared we're willing to hate and willing to be cruel. But the pendulum is swinging, and people are just seeing the hate and the cruelty, and they don't like it. It wasn't Democrats who ran out in the streets in the winter in Minneapolis or in Chicago in the fall. It was just people who ran out and said, "Stop it."
Right.
Stop it.
Yeah, and the one kind of radical concept that's really emerged in the last couple of years is, I think it was Adam Serwer in the Atlantic who dubbed it neighborism. It's just. Uh-huh. It's just the instinct of seeing bad things happen to your neighbor, and I think maybe and this gets back to the guy that you met in North Carolina, but I think maybe we're seeing a dichotomy from certain kinds of people who, for one reason or another, either they're older or some other reason, they don't get out much. Increasingly, their exposure to the world is only through the media, and when that happens, your mind can really get warped, right? But other people who, while they do get exposed to that stuff, and they might have a conservative, for want of a better term, inclination, but they also work, go out, go to church, go to places where they meet other people, and we're an increasingly diverse society, and it's. If you live a life and you're out there and you're dealing with people, you're dealing with people who don't look like you, or maybe came from a different country originally, and yet they're coworkers or friends or neighbors, and as a result, a lot of people just don't like what's happening here. It's going to be interesting to see over the next few days what kind of backlash there is to this shooting down in Houston. Certainly in Houston. Texas is obviously a very red state. This year it's a very politicized state, right? They have election for Senate. They have an election also for governor, and they've had the whole redistricting thing in with their House seats. So there's a lot going there politically, and let's not forget. This is really important, but Trump's plan for desperately trying to cling to power in Congress, a lot of it's hinged on this whole redistricting scheme, and Texas was ground zero, where they redrew the maps with their plan to gain 5 seats. But I think what not everybody understands about that is a lot of why they were able to do that was they saw a big swing in Latino voters towards Trump starting in 2020, but really accelerating in 2024. And those maps hinged on a strong bond between Latinos and the Republican Party, and these actions by ICE are breaking that apart. Because even Latinos who maybe have been in the country for several generations, they actually have concerns about immigration, newcomers.
Yeah, they ran away from dictatorial governments around the world. right? I mean, or gang
Yeah.
governments
Right.
around the mobsters and dictators, and now they got one in the White House, and they don't like it. Hey, Will, we're out of time. I really appreciate your work as always. The stuff you're doing on ICE is incredible, and I just you're doing the country a big service.
Oh gosh, that's so kind of you, Edwin. Well, I mean, you're doing the same with these conversations. We just need to keep talking and just not be numb to what's going on, and this is part of it.
All right. Well, thank you, and I look forward to our next one.
Yeah, me too, Edwin. You take care.
Bye. Bye. All right, everybody. Take a quick break in your calls when we come back.
Welcome back to Edwin Eisendrath's It's the Democracy, Stupid on WCPT 820.
Okay, 773-763-9278, 773-763-9278. Jim, what's on your mind this week?
Hi, Edwin. Right and left. Two things coined in the French Revolution. Right, it was obvious you were for the monarch and his patronage, and left, if you didn't have any patrons and you were broke, so you went to the left. But those terms were coined in the French Revolution, but yet they still exist today. And in my mind, is this left now? All the soccer people coming in the United States have a 3-week to a month paid vacation. We're only one of 9 countries that don't allow it. They all have health care. They all have university rights. Now, is that left or right, or what is it? You tell me. Tell me. Or is it just human rights? Isn't that? Didn't Thomas Paine and Jefferson at the tail end of that revolution, they came to the conclusion of the human rights. Jefferson didn't get a chance to write that for America, but I know that Paul Fitzgerald brought it up. Eleanor Roosevelt brought it up in '48. We need a constitution for human rights, and that's every human. But these terms left and right. Now, I grew up in the '60s. Jack Kennedy, Johnson, Eisenhower. But I never in school in my civics, I said, well, he was left and he was right, and he was left and he was right. I got that in driving school, but I didn't get it in school. But it drives me nuts, because what would a left? Let's say the leftist leaning candidate we have in the United States took over. Now, what will we get? Universal health care, a month paid vacation, union wages. What would that be? A horrendous thing to happen? And as far as the court, remember when Roosevelt tried to expand the court because they were giving him a hard time? But that cost him in that midterm, because even his own party was like, no, we don't go that far. The point is, you can't get everybody in a consensus on the same page, no matter how good your intentions are. And but anyway, oh my God, I can't. This poor guy shot, and in the stomach. He got it in the stomach. And studying a lot of military wounds and so on, that is the worst place to get shot, because it's just excruciating death. I mean, you're better off shot through the head, really, than be shot through the stomach. And they shot him through the stomach. And again, it's the old story about, oh, well, he tried to smash into my car. And they've been using that now since ICE has been on the street. They're smashing in the cars. I mean, I don't know what we're going to do. We're just going to have to protest like mad. But anyway, you're right about your gentleman about the House is right. We've got to come from that angle. That we've got to get the House to get on the ball and put some legislation in to stop this court, because we can't have the court rule. Trump gets 2 more picks. Think of that, the horror of that. He'll get 2 teenagers on the court, and we'll be stuck with him for another century. So we've got to do something through the House of Representatives. And Edwin, great show as usual, and you have a good week. Thank you, Edwin.
Well, thank you, as always. I really appreciate your participation. I do. All right, let's see. Nancy, you're next.
Edwin, how are you doing?
Thank you, I'm well.
Good. Boy, you finally had someone on who said what I've been screaming about for the last 50 years. Who was your guest the last hour?
Well, I had two. I had Alex Aronson, who is watches the courts and the judiciary, and I had Will Bunch, the journalist from Philadelphia Inquirer.
Oh, it must have been Alex who watches the courts, because
Yeah.
he finally said it. The system is broken. They should be defying the not so Supreme Court. And who's responsible for them? Who's going to demand that they be held accountable? No one.
Nancy, let me just stop you for 1 second. He was really careful about this in a way that I haven't been in the past. He did not say to defy them. He said that Congress has the right, and they do in the Constitution, to create exceptions, to say the court cannot rule on certain things. He's saying to follow the law, not to ignore them, but to use the power of the law to say to them. Then they would be ignoring the Congress, not the other way around, if they went after them.
Right. But here's the thing, like he said, follow the law. We have no one enforcing laws now, because
we do not.
This government that's and I won't say our government, because it ain't.
They don't want to be your government, Nancy. They want no part of you or me.
That's right. This government is breaking the law every single day, and the system is broken. And the reason they got here is because no one, none of our Congresses, is that how you say it? Anyway, they haven't made any changes to our laws in 200 years. They started with, and believe me, I give all the credit to our founding fathers, but they started with 4 million people in this country, and only the rich white men were voting. Have they changed anything since then? Oh, heck no. And don't tell me about amendments, because now they're taking us backwards anyway. So it doesn't matter what they did do, but our election system has been broken for a long time. It's been tampered with for a long time. Tricky Dick got in illegitimately. Ray Gun got in illegitimately. Nobody's saying a darn word about it. That's why we the people, the majority, that's what I call we the people who have any brains, the majority of us, none of our stuff gets, everything's being taken away, and none of our laws get passed, as this, I think your last guest just said, about how Democrats always get things voted down.
The court has put its hand on the scale in a partisan way. And John Roberts says, no, we're not partisan judges, but he is not correct. He is a partisan judge, without any question.
Why is there no way to, there's got to be a way to figure out, and it could have been changed long ago, how to not get to this point where we have courts being packed. And this guy, this 34-time felon, he should have never been in our White House, not the first time, and especially not the second time.
Yeah,
and
you and I are in agreement about that, but Americans didn't agree with us. And now we're suffering.
That's another thing that just irks me. When they say, oh, well, that's who we voted for. Did you ever hear that old joke? The punchline is, what do you mean, we, Kemosabe? Don't be putting me in that group. Don't be putting any of us in that group.
But you and I are part of the same country with the people who put him in.
Well, you're not going to ever convince me that he got in legitimately either time. Because,
I'm not going to try.
By the way, I have a bone to pick with you when you opened with your, when you first spoke at the beginning of the show, and you blamed the 34-time felon and all his maggots. No. You know who's to blame? This broken system of ours that no one's willing to change.
Well, fair point. I am all for changing and radically, particularly to take back our Constitution from this rogue court, to deal with campaign finance, to deal with some of those questions of hyper-partisanship that have driven you crazy. I agree with that. My only point in this was, we've had a bunch of presidents since the system has been broken, but these guys have made us a laughing stock in the world.
Oh,
Man.
definitely. Definitely. You know who's going to win this, or who's going to get us back on track, hopefully, if it's ever possible? Someone who's going to stand up and say, you know what, forget the labels. We can't distinguish ourselves, Republican, Democrat, Independent. No, we can't do that. We, the people, must stand together and fight for our country and take it back from the politicians, because we, the people, have not had control of this government in a really, really, really long time. And they
Nancy,
don't even listen to us anymore because money controls them, and they don't even have to worry about who's going to get a vote and who isn't. Who's going to vote for them and who isn't. Because money is behind everything. Corporations and money are running the world now.
That is going to be the last word on that, because I got to get through the list. But thank you as always for, you were at this for 3 hours with me today. I really appreciate it, Nancy. I do.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Dan, how are things in the great state of Indiana?
Hi, Edwin. Well, I don't put those two terms together. I haven't for many years. The great state of Indiana, but I'm stuck here at the moment until I go to the Rainbow Bridge pretty soon. But anyway, besides that, I love the passion of your last caller. I've heard her before. But the problem is we have to deal with where we're at. And I think you would agree with that. We can't go back and change anything now from the past. And here's where we're at. We have a maniac surrounded by lunatics and maniacs and corrupt politicians that are going to try to steal this next election. You know it, I know it. And my question is, how are we going to deal with it? We've already seen over and over, I've seen it over and over, especially even from him, saying we're going to start putting the communists, the communists is the new special word. The communists are going to go into the detention camps, which of course means Democrats. And I'm sure you're aware of what I'm talking about.
Of course I am.
All I want is 60 seconds notice when they come to the door. And when people start realizing this, it might be too late, Edwin. This goes back to Nazi Germany. We've talked about this prior. How long until we fight back? And I'm not talking about standing on the street corner with a sign. How long until we fight back? Is it going to be when they steal the election? Because there will be another January 6th, one way or another in some capacity. It's a given.
Well, Dan, I want to try and talk you off the cliff a little bit. And only this, look, I am as angry as you are and as determined to end this threat to our democracy and to the progress we've made on human freedom, on inalienable rights, on all those things that we have stood for and made progress on. But if we take up arms and do it that way, we do not end up in a better place. We do not end up with the result that you want or I want. And think of all of those students who were part of the overturning of the Shah, only to find the powers that took over were ones that ruined their whole lives. We have the means to win this fight. He will try and cheat in the next election. No, strike that. He is already trying to cheat and steal the next election. Absolutely, 100%. And I am, heartened that in Hungary, where they don't have the tradition of democracy that we have, still they managed an election that was not free and was not fair, but still happened. They managed to throw them out. And I believe that Americans are going to show up They're going to stand in line. They're going to demand their votes be counted. The people who are working in the polling places are their neighbors, they're volunteers. That's what happens in elections all over the country. That's not run by Washington. No matter how many times Donald Trump has tried to take it in Washington, he's been told no. So we are going to have elections. They will not be completely free. They will not be completely fair, and we will overwhelm them. Then they will say, oh, well, they weren't completely free and fair. You guys cheated. We're not seating you. We will get seated. And when we're there, we will use the power we have to start fighting back. I'm not ready to give all that up and I'm not willing to give all that up and grab a rifle. Not yet.
Okay. But,
yeah.
All right. I'm glad to hear you say not yet, at least. At least I got that from you for the first time.
No, well,
anyway.
if the democracy crumbles and we end up in a different kind of world, then my allegiance to the democracy would have me behave differently to the thing that replaces it.
We have no choice. At that point, we have no choice. That's exactly what my point is.
But just because we have a president that wants to take us there doesn't mean we are there. He does want to take us there, no question. And his Republican Party in Congress has abetted him up to a point. You know, they haven't passed the SAVE Act in the Senate, at least. They did in the House. Those House Republicans have abetted this 100%, no question. And the court has abetted it 100%. All of which there's going to have to be some corrections made. Anyway, as usual, I appreciate your noting how dire this time is, and I agree with you about that.
It's dire, yeah. And thank you, Edwin. Great show. Thank you.
Bye. All right, Paul.
Well, Edwin, just for the previous caller and for everybody, I would suggest that the cover-up of the death of a sitting U.S. senator is the beginning of the fix for the election. I'm sorry, but the chances that Mitch McConnell, the probability that he is still living, are about the same as the probability that Nancy Guthrie is still living. We don't have evidence for either that they are expired, but I would say that the law of parsimony, Occam's razor, would strongly suggest that that is the case for both.
Well, remember, we had a missing congressman for 100 days, but he showed back up.
Yeah, he showed up, and I think that he was not fully recovered from the reason for his given what he said that
right.
he's having he has depression and that he said that, hey, if you can't afford lobster and steak and ribeye for your 4th of July celebrations, maybe you don't work as hard as I do. Yeah, he sells that to the people who are paying his salary, by the way. So, yeah. Well,
anyway, I don't know what the deal is with Mitch McConnell. I expect, he had polio as a kid, and that leads to some very tough complications as you get older. So he's in. If he hasn't gone to that great caucus in the sky, and I don't wish him ill, even though I've never agreed with him on maybe anything. I wish him a full recovery, and I hope he doesn't return to the Senate, but I wish him a full recovery. But if he does die, that creates some interesting political opportunities for sure.
He won't be back to the Senate. I could tell you with experience in my own family that this is now day 27 in the hospital. For every week that you're in the hospital when you're in your 80s, it will be at least a week in inpatient rehab, and then the same number of months at home rehab. This is what my mother went through, so I'm just telling you that. Anyway, on to Alex Aronson. He was right on that Marbury versus Madison has been sorely misinterpreted, I'm sorry to say, by so many lawyers. I count myself lucky. People ask me, "Did you go to law school?" And I say, "Yeah, I went to the Robert H. Jackson School of Law," which is a joke because that means I'm self-taught. But I have always thought that and known that Marbury versus Madison did not carve out new powers for the judiciary, for the Supreme Court. It was based on the Supremacy Clause. And it's just funny. I just gave a presentation at a forum back in March about this very thing. that what it did was say that the Judiciary Act of 1789, Section 13, which said that the Supreme Court could hand down writs of mandamus to other branches of government, was powers that are not in the Constitution, are not in Article 3, and therefore the law was unconstitutional. It also said, because of that, that William Marbury, though his commission was signed and sealed but not delivered, did because the court could not hand down a writ of mandamus, a ruling,
directing the government to behave. Yeah,
basically a judgment of equity to tell the executive branch what to do. That though, yes, they said that you do have an injury and there is a cause. Yes, the Jefferson administration won't deliver your commission, but part of standing is that there has to be also a remedy, and this court does not have a remedy, so you don't have standing. That's basically it. And it's similar to, and that what my presentation was about, are the powers that the branches of government have that are not expressly written in the Constitution that basically come from the Supremacy Clause. And that includes the Marbury versus the companion or the corollary, which is Martin versus Hunter's lessee, which says the Supreme Court also has power of ruling over the state courts in certain circumstances, and McCulloch versus Maryland, which refers to the necessary and proper clause of the Section 8 of Article 1. By the way, McCulloch, did you know that it's McCulloch, not McCulloch v. Maryland, but the court clerk has a problem with C's and inserted a C at the end of the name to make it McCulloch. And similarly, in a case 4 years later called Johnson v. Mintosh, was supposed to be Macintosh. This guy has a problem with his C's. Anyway, those were the cases. And then also for the executive powers, I talked about the Sawyer versus it was the 1952, the Truman case, Sawyer case, about how the court interprets the executive powers, the executive orders.
Yeah. It's the Steele case, Judge Jackson.
Yeah, Youngstown Sheet and Tube.
Steele.
Yeah, Youngstown Sheet and Tube. That was that case. But this court has taken, and like I said, it stuns me how many lawyers just take that. Oh yeah, it means the court can do whatever they rule whatever they want. But no, as a matter of fact, it was in 1938 when Harlan Fiske Stone in the United States versus Caroline Product, footnote 4, talked about, well, the court that was presumed constitutionality. We presume that laws that Congress passes are constitutional when it comes to things like economics and interstate commerce. But when it comes to fundamental rights, including things like race, we will use strict scrutiny to examine these laws.
Yeah. They've thrown that away. They've thrown that away.
You guys absolutely thrown that away. We won't take strict. We just throw it. And so this court, with regard to the 14th Amendment, is how do you get narrower than the courts? Right immediately following the passage.
We don't have time to start
Amendment.
the 14th Amendment discussion, Paul. In fact, I got to go because I have one more caller and 2 minutes before the show starts. So thank you.
Okay. Yep.
Oh, Brian dropped. I don't have one more caller. Well, for those of you who have stuck with me through this whole roller coaster of a show, I'm deeply grateful. I know we have talked about the terrible things that are going on in this country, but I hope you got the idea, listening to these guests, that there are solutions available to us to our most miserable problems, whether that is drought and floods and storms of climate change, which we heard at the beginning, or the mess in Congress, which, guys like Sean Casten are the right kind of folks that just really, I don't want to say right kind of folks. It's just, there are a lot of kind of folks who have the right stuff, and he's one of them. right, who understands what you can get done in Congress to move the country forward. We can do this, and we are doing it this primary season. We are finding them all over the country. And, Alex Aronson is absolutely right. One of the key missions of Democrats, certainly, is going to be to say, we will take our Constitution back from a rogue court that thinks it is ruling over all of us. And finally, Will Bunch reminding us that, at the end of the day, it's about our humanity and we can't let people be shot in the street in front of us. We won't. We won't do it. We won't let that happen. We will demand we get our country back. And it is incumbent on each of us to protect our votes and to protect people when they go to vote. And I'm going to remind you 100 times between now and November, we need a plan, every one of us, about how we're going to do